Hello, a warm welcome to the Horror Screams podcast, episode 13. We are an extension of the Horror Screams Video Vault website, and we're here for our Halloween special episode. And I'm joined today, I'm Stephen, by the way, and I'm joined today by Sarah, our resident, as she likes to be called, zombie nut. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm very good, thank you. Looking forward to the episode, and Halloween, of course, best time of the year.
It is the best time of the year by far. Yeah, Halloween, as we record this, we're recording this on the 24th of October, which here in merry old England is the night the clocks go back. Or as people in our neck of the woods say, it gets later earlier, which makes no sense because we're from the backwoods. We're from wrong turn territory, deliverance land.
Absolutely.
And we're both cousins. It's just madness here. Halloween is just like a week away. It's on a Saturday this year, which doesn't matter so much this year because every day is sort of the same day as the other one because we don't know what day it is anyway. But yes, so that's very exciting. We're going to be talking today about the Psycho series, in particular Psycho, because it's 60 years old, another major anniversary. We dealt with The Shining last month, which is 40 years old. So it's good to tick off some of the big heavy hitters of the horror world. We'll also be looking at the scariest movie moments from our perspective of all time. So a really personal list of our favourite frightening bits from films, which incredibly subjective, but we'll pick our favourites, tell you why, and then we'll be inviting you in as well to send us yours. But before all of that, as ever, we'll start with recently seen. So Sarah, since the last podcast a month ago, what have you been up to? What have you been watching?
Well, we've been watching quite a lot of the Grimfest movies. Grimfest was a festival that took place in Manchester this year, but I think like Fright Fest, it was a no-go area to go to, so they just put it all online. So we've been watching quite a lot of those movies and reviewed quite a lot of them, which we've put up on the site. But I just wanted to mention a couple of the ones that I saw because I think they definitely deserve an extra mention.
Sure.
So my first one that I watched for Grimfest is Death Ranch, which is by director Charlie Steeds. It was set in the 1970s, and it's basically about three black siblings end up on a farm because one of them's escaped from prison, and they have to fight their way through some cannibalistic KKK members. It's masses of fun, masses of blood, and a really good watch.
Nice. That sounds really good. Do we know if that's got a release coming up, or is that still in limbo land?
Oh, I don't know. I think Pete will be the person that we will have to consult on that one. He would know these things, but hopefully that will be coming out soon.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because we watch these things and then you're like, and you kind of wait for it to come out and it seems to take ages, or sometimes it appears almost immediately on Amazon Prime or something.
That's definitely one to check out.
Cool. Yeah, Grimfest, there's been a bunch of big festivals that, as I'm sure is the case elsewhere in the world, have gone to streaming this year. The London Film Festival was, I think, partly a live event still, but mostly, for most people, would be streaming through the BFI player. And they had a few horror movies. I didn't get to watch them, but they had the Brandon Cronenberg movie Possessor, which is meant to be sensational. Chip off the old block, Brandon Cronenberg. No prizes for guessing who he's related to. Yes, it's Sam Raimi. And Fright Fest Halloween special is currently playing. It's been playing since Wednesday, so that's another one that would normally be a live event in Leicester Square. Grimfest, we watched a few. So at Grimfest, I watched a film by Alistair Orr called Triggered, which is not to be confused with the Triggered by Chris Moore from a couple of years ago, which is also actually really sensational. But Triggered, it's really cool. Sarah, you must watch this immediately. And come back and tell us how you felt, because it's great. So this is a film where, for once, having a collection of almost entirely horrible people as the potential victims actually works because it's really witty and bitchy. The dialogue is really great. And it doesn't matter that you dislike most of them because you kind of meant to. And they're amusingly horrible. There's one sympathetic character, but basically a bunch of people, grad students, wake up in the woods, effectively wearing suicide vests with timers counting down on their chest, and it's an arrangement, kind of Saw-like arrangement, and it's even acknowledged in the dialogue that Saw is possibly an inspiration for this film's madman, who has his own vendetta against these students, which becomes clear in the film. But it's ultra nasty. It's really brutal, but hilariously funny. There's some great dialogue, loads of quote-worthy dialogue. And the director's previous film, From a House on Willow Street, had promise, but it wasn't anything memorable, I don't think. But Triggered actually is. So that was probably, one of my top picks from Grimfest for sure. What's your next one, Sarah?
Excellent. My next one was one that I need to mention, but it's one that I wasn't particularly that keen on, but it was called The Deep Ones by Chad Ferrin. And it's a take on H.P. Lovecraft's monsters from his short stories, actually called The Deep Ones. But unfortunately, it doesn't really feature them that much. It doesn't really build up on that until you get right to the end. There's the odd tentacle floating about here and there, but you don't get to see anything much in the way of the monsters until towards the end. But it's kind of based around a couple that rent an Airbnb, and they're kind of in this very strange seaside resort, and the neighbours and people around them are overly friendly and a little bit weird. It's very well acted, and the characters that play the couple are very good, but it just didn't quite cut it all that well.
Yeah, that's a shame, because it sounded really good, that one. I quite like the sound of that one.
Yeah. I mean, it did have its moments, and it could have just done with just being a little bit more sea monstery.
Yeah. Lovecraft is notoriously difficult to kind of translate, isn't it? I really like... Did you watch Colour Out of Space?
I haven't seen that one, no.
That's fabulous. That's probably the best, or certainly the best for a long time. That's translated some of the wackier ideas, and it looks amazing. And Nicolas Cage is great, and he's an alpaca farmer, and loads of stuff going on. It's mental, and it's not entirely heartless either. There's a creature aspect, there's some gore in it, but it's got some really great characters as well, and it's got the Lovecraft ideas embedded into its story. It just works really well. But yeah, The Deep One sounds interesting. Cool.
Yeah, that is the thing. It kind of either goes one or the other way, doesn't it, with Lovecraft? They either do it really well or it never really works.
Yeah, there are some kind of mental ideas that are really tricky to put on the screen, especially at a low budget level. You can either suggest them, I suppose, or you can go all out and show them if you're able to. But that's cool. Probably worth a look, though. Also at Grimfest, probably my favourite horror film of recent times, and I say that a lot, but maybe the last few weeks at least, is a film called... maybe this week, is a film called Rent-A-Pal. Rent-A-Pal is written and directed by John Stevenson, and this is great. This has a lot of almost fetish-like shots of a VCR, but it's not quite that film. It's set in 1990, and it has the main plot is a real throwback to days that you and I probably vaguely remember being around, which is the idea of video dating, where this awkward process where you'd record a really awkward message. Not that I've done this, of course, I was less than 12 at the time, but you'd record an awful message of yourself saying how awesome you are on video cassette, and eventually that video cassette will get to someone else that's done the same thing. And this is great. It's about a guy called David, played really well by Brian Landis Falcons, who's terribly lonely. You really like him. He lives with his mum. He's 40, and his mum's got dementia. And in fact, she spends most of the film thinking that he's his dead dad. In scenes which are uncomfortable, funny, and really, really sad all at the same time. And he's really desperately waiting for some girl out there to pick up his video and like his video. No one ever really does. And instead he rents something called Rent-A-Pal, which is exactly what it sounds like on the tin, which is basically where a nice chap called Andy, played by Will Wheaton of last month's Stand By Me. Yeah, he's great in this. Will Wheaton is only in this film as a talking head on a video cassette, but he's so great, and takes on a life of his own. And he becomes, and our hero becomes obsessed and immersed in this weird friendship with Andy. And it's him at his most vulnerable because of his mum. He does start a relationship with a woman who does like his videotape. And you really want it to go well, but you have this awful dread that it just isn't going to, because obviously you do know this is a horror film. Yeah, it pays off really powerfully at the end. But more importantly, I think it's just a really good story of loneliness, and it's played so well. It doesn't patronize the leading character, it doesn't use him for cheap laughs, but it is funny at the same time because it's very humane. And I think on an episode where we're talking about horror's most famous Mother's Boy, this is a really good tie into that. It's not a million miles away from Norman Bates, and it doesn't necessarily end the way you think it might with that in mind. So Rent Pal, yeah, absolutely loved it. It's really well done.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I remember you saying you have to watch it. So that's another
Oh,
one going with Triggered on my list. That does sound really good. Looking forward to seeing that one.
oh, you should.
Okay, I've got another
Both
good
would have
one.
worked really well. Oh, sorry, I was going to say both.
Here we go.
The only bad thing about watching it in the ridiculous comfort of your own home with these festival movies is that you think, I wish I'd have watched that with an audience because they would have loved it. That's the only downside.
Oh, sorry, I'm carrying on. Okay, the next film is one that you've seen as well, but I think, did you see this one for Fright Fest, Stephen? 12-hour Shift.
Oh yes, I like this one a lot. Yeah, this was fun. Yeah.
Is another really good one by director Brea Grant. It was about a nurse who's working, well, she works like about a million 12-hour shifts, one after the other, doesn't she? But she's also
Yeah.
addicted to drugs, so she's taking the patient's medication and stuff like that. And she is a nice person. She seems to be looking after people and stuff, but her and her receptionist friend have got a bit of a side deal going on in organ trafficking on the black market. So they're trying to do a deal, and there's a bit of a, her cousin is the person that's delivering the organs and stuff to the gang, and she's a complete write-off. She's away with the fairies. She doesn't know what she's doing with herself, and things go a little bit wrong, and they lose the organs, or they mysteriously keep disappearing. So she then gets bullied by the gang to go back and get another kidney, and the girl that picks up the organs and stuff tries to get off Mandy how she kills people, and ends up just kind of going around trying to kill people herself to get the organs, and the body count just kind of like mounts up, and things get more and more awkward, and the police get involved, and David Arquette turns up as a escaped prisoner who's tried to kill himself so he can escape, and all kind of crazy stuff is going on. But it's really funny, but it's also got quite a heartfelt story at it as well, because one of the patients that comes in turns out to be Mandy's brother, and yeah, it's just really good. Very well done, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, 12-hour Shift is great. Angela Bett is fantastic. She does pick really interesting roles in horror or things that are tangentially horror. She's really good. And you're right, the tone is really cleverly manipulated, I suppose. It starts off as something and you think it might just be this flippant thing with no real heart, but then you realise it totally does. And you're totally rooting for Angela Bett's character. And even the character, what's her name? The awful one. What's she called?
Regina.
Yeah, Regina. Regina is that you almost end up sort of loving Regina as well. She's very funny, and you almost don't want anything bad to happen to her, even though she is not a great human being at times. Yeah.
And it's set in 1999 as well, so they're all wearing like the big flares, and it's like, oh wow, the fashions of the 90s. It was great. They're all talking about Y2K and stuff like that.
That's right. Yeah, at first I was like, why is this set in 1990? And it kind of made sense in the end, and it did add something to it that it made it wasn't of this moment. It made a lot more sense. And it's got random stuff, hasn't it? It's got the dancing paramedic with his headphones. It's got
he was awesome.
Random supporting characters. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah, you think David Arquette's going to be like, you're like, oh wow, that's David Arquette. He's going to be in it loads. He just pops up from time to time.
Yes, yeah, I believe, wasn't he the producer or executive producer?
He was
involved
yeah.
in it, wasn't he? Yeah, which is cool. He's an interesting guy. He has been involved in different horror movies, in sometimes small acting roles, but he's been behind the camera. He directed a film called The Tripper years ago, which was quite fun. So cool. He's obviously got an interest in this low-budget end of the genre, which is really cool. 12-hour Shift, I think it is either on release or it's about to get a release via streaming and such things. So that's well worth keeping a peeper out for. Another one for Grimfest for me was a totally different tone entirely from all the ones I mentioned, a film called Unearth, which is an eco-horror in effect about the impact of fracking on a couple of families in a, what I'd say is economically dwindling area. They've been left behind. A massive corporation has essentially sold them out, and most of the people there have no chance, or no choice rather, to survive. They have to basically sell their land to this big company that's going to stitch them up for the profits anyway. And it's a horror story already without the actual horror, but then you realise that because it relates so much to the grim world of our times, but then you realise that the fracking itself seems to be having a dreadful impact on the health of these families, two families in particular. And Adrienne Barbeau, who is, of course, a horror heroine of some vintage, dating back 40 years to the fog, when she was sensational as the DJ. She's the matriarch of one of these families, and she's great. It's probably her best role for a long time. But what happens to them is really grim. It does have a degree of, I suppose, Cronenbergish body horror to it, but it's not an all-out splatterfest, but it's mostly just full of dread. And it's really powerful, actually. I really liked Unearth. It creeps up on you. It's not a film of jump scares or super fast pacing, but it's really disturbing. And it does relate to some disturbing real stories of where, especially in America, I think it was Texas, where there was horrific water contamination in areas where fracking had taken place. So it's a very environmentally aware horror film with kind of sadly all too realistic outcome for some of the characters. Unearth is really good. What else have you been watching, Sarah?
My final Grimfest watch was one that I just kind of just picked it because of the name and didn't really think much about it, but I absolutely loved it. It's called Anonymous Animals, and it's definitely not going to be for everyone, this one, but it's kind of along, I suppose it's not really an eco-horror, but it's along those kind of lines, because it's basically humans being treated the way that we treat animals. The characters are, the main characters, the evil characters, are the animals, apparently. They're humanoid in form, but they have animal heads. So you've got a bull, a horse, a stag, and they're all kind of treating humans the way that we treat the animals. So the stag is hunting people through the woods on, like, for fun, just for a laugh. The bull and the horse working in an abattoir. So they're bringing in live humans and, prodding them and scaring them before they're then slaughtering them. And then you have this one really sweet story of this dog that finds a human tied to a tree or wounded, and you think to yourself, oh, he's going to rescue him. It's going to be really sweet. And he does, like, picks him up in his truck and takes him home and feeds him up and tends his wounds. And you're like, oh, this is actually really sweet. And then he takes him to an illegal human fight.
That's brilliant.
It was really good, and there is not a single word of dialogue at all. It's all sounds, and the music is really creepy. It's incredibly atmospheric, and the setting is beautiful. It's all set in the woods, and it's all creepy and foggy. Unfortunately, it lets itself down because it is quite gloomy. There's times when you can't see an awful lot going on, but I just love the thought of it, and the way it was done just, like, went straight to my heart. I was just like, I love this kind of stuff. I need to see more of. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely something different, and everyone that I've told has always seemed quite interested in it and looked it up and checked it out. So I hope more people do.
That sounds incredible. Yeah, that sounds awesome, actually. It's Anonymous Animals, right?
That is it. Yep, Anonymous Animals.
I think it's an interesting time. I think we'll see more and more ecologically aware horror films like that, and Unearth. It makes sense given what's going on in the picture. That sounds great. And I suppose maybe it's a modern extension of things like Animal Farm. It sounds to me
definitely,
like spin on
very,
that.
very much so. Very much so. And I liked the way that they didn't use any dialogue and stuff. It made it more real. And the puppetry in the animal heads and stuff, really realistic. It looked really, really good. If they had a bigger budget, they could have done a lot more, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good.
That's cool. That's great that that's had some proper exposure through the festival, even if it is online, isn't it? That's the kind of thing that you probably wouldn't encounter otherwise if it wasn't for a festival. So.
No, definitely not. And it is quite a short one. It's literally just under an hour again. So, you're not sat there waiting for things to pan out. Things happen straight away and you get into it straight away.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. One more from me as well in terms of recently seen, and another from Grimfest, which actually, if this evidence is to go by, is really, really strong lineup this year. Although, to be honest, I've not been totally aware of Grimfest. I've never been to it in person, so I'm not massively switched on about how decent their output usually is. So the last one for me is 10 Minutes to Midnight, which is, again, really good. Another small budget film that's full of ideas and great acting. this is a great showcase for Caroline Williams, who many moons ago was the star of Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, which I still think is one of the great sequels of all time, of any genre, actually. It's totally bonkers. And Caroline Williams has been in total rubbish. She's usually really good, but she's been in terrible films like Blink, which was at Fright Fest in August, and which is embarrassingly bad. It's almost compulsively bad. And you just can't believe that they didn't realise how awful it was. But she's great in this. So 10 Minutes to Midnight is a story of, she's a DJ. In fact, she's not a million miles away from the DJ she played in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. So she could, I suppose, be an older version of Stretch from that film. But she isn't. And she's basically at a radio station. She's hosted a show on late night radio for about 30 years. She doesn't quite know it until she turns up, but she's being replaced by someone younger because the boss is a total lech, and because the industry is sexist anyway, and ageist, obviously. And she happens to be bitten by a rabid bat. And the film, before she starts, and the film where the characters are cut off by a big storm is entirely set in the radio station, is about her total meltdown, but it's also set against this weird forced retirement that she's about to be moved into. So it's really bitter. She's tremendous. She brings such energy to this part, and such great dialogue that she's given as well, which is terribly and sadly rare for actresses in other genres when they reach a certain age, but in horror seems to be a golden palace of opportunity sometimes. And as much as it is about her becoming a sort of vampire as a result of the bite, it's more about the plight of women of a certain age in a male-driven, ageist industry. Like in this case, it's a media industry. She's brilliant. The movie itself is really cleverly cast as well. So 10 Minutes to Midnight does have a quota of horror and gore, but it's a great character-driven piece as well. Highly recommended, that one. Really cool.
Excellent. Okay, I have one more. It's not a Grimfest one, but I think it's one that was recently shown at Fright Fest in August. And it is once again another one of these movies that's appeared this year. It was made in 2020, and it goes along the lines of following a pandemic. It's also it's not really a zombie movie, but it's about as zombie movie as I've seen recently. Unfortunately, I've been a bit slack on the zombie movies, so this one I lapped up. Yeah. It's more infected rather than zombies, but it's basically following a family it's based in a hotel, so you're following two different people. You're following a family, a husband and wife and their young child, but you can tell that there's something a little bit off with the husband and wife. You can tell there's some kind of like domestic abuse or something going on. She's always covered in bruises and he's very controlling. And then there's also a young pregnant lady, a Japanese lady that's escaped from her country, and I think it's in Canada, I might be wrong, but she heads over there to get away from her husband as well. But they all check into this hotel. They're all on the third floor, and there's stuff on the news about a flu pandemic, so everyone's kind of on guard like we are at the moment, and there's fundraisers and stuff going on for the hospitals and stuff, and there's a fundraiser going on downstairs in this hotel, but a guy releases some kind of chemical or infection onto that floor, and a lot of people just end up it's kind of like they just kind of melt onto the floor. They can't get up. They're definitely turning into some kind of zombie thing. You know, their veins are popping out. There's like complete paralysis. They're frothing at the mouth. Their eyes are popping. But they never really seem to go much further than that, do they? They just kind of crawl along the ground. They do get a bit violent with each other, but they don't tend to run after you and bite you as such. But the woman and the daughter have to kind of escape from the floor. And it all kind of ends quite abruptly, really. They manage to get away, but that's all I kind of want to say about it, because you need to see the end. But it's a very weird, abrupt ending. But it does have some good characters in it. The Japanese lady is really sweet. I did find the woman that played the mother a little bit annoying. The kid was okay, but it also has Mark Gibson as the evil father, who was also one of the main characters in Exit Humanity, which is another really good zombie movie. But yeah, have you not seen Exit Humanity?
No, no, I don't think so, actually.
Oh, it's a really good one. It's like a Western zombie movie. He's really good in it. But yeah, Hall was a kind of a mixture. It doesn't really go along the lines of the way you think that it's going to. It's more domestic abuse and personal traumas and stuff like that more than anything, with a few like infected flopping about people. But they do look really cool, and yeah, it does have a very weird ending. Have you seen? You didn't see it, did you, Stephen? You
No,
just
I
heard
wanted
about it.
to. Yeah, it had a really cool trailer from memory. It just clashed with something else, I think, when it was at Fright Fest in, like I said, in August. But it had a real mixed response, although I do wonder if part of that was from memory. I think there were some technical issues with that one. Something, perhaps it was the sound. There's been a few technical issues, obviously, as you'd expect with festivals going online and consumer internet, especially around here. But
Yeah,
I think people, you know what it's like if you watch something and the sound's a bit shagged or the picture's, blotchy or glitchy.
yeah.
It does ruin the experience, even if it's a good film. So maybe it was partly that. I don't know, but I'd like to see it. It sounds quite cool,
It
actually.
starts off really well. It goes like starts like straight off like bang into like the infection hitting and stuff, and kind of goes backwards in time and then forwards, and so you can keep returning back to the floor and seeing
Yeah,
the people degrading and stuff. It is really good.
that's
Definitely one I'd
cool.
watched again.
Yeah, that sounds cool, actually. There's a whole bunch. I mean, they're showing right now at the Fright Fest that's playing and finishes tomorrow. They're showing a good 30 or 40 horror films, some of which there's one called Benny Loves You, which apparently has gone down a storm. I'm not going to get a chance to watch it, but it's about a scorned teddy bear. It's about a discarded teddy bear that comes back for revenge,
Oh,
and the audience reception that I've kind of been tracking a little bit on Twitter is fantastic.
oh,
I've
that sounds
forgotten
awesome.
the tagline is something to do with the teddy scorned, but yeah, there's apparently a few real gems in there, so that's cool. It's good to see them, but I think a lot of these films are strong enough, including Hall, and commercial enough to be picked up by whether it's Amazon or Netflix or some of the DVD companies. It's pretty much guaranteed, I think, for something of the caliber of that, and Triggered as well. So that's cool. The only other recently seen thing that I will mention finally is Bly Manor, or The Haunting of Bly Manor, which I've been watching on the Netflix, which is a 9-part follow-up to Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House from, I guess, a couple of years ago now, which I thought was really great. I haven't quite finished Bly Manor. I've got 2 episodes to go, and I really like it. It's had, I think we were discussing earlier, but it's had a real mixed response. So
Yeah.
some have found it hard going. Um, I mean, the pacing is usually something that people highlight. Oh, it's slow, and it is slow, but it's probably no real slower than The Haunting of Hill House. So I think
Yeah, I was going to say Hill
that's a
House
gauge
had its moments. You know, it was a grower, wasn't it? That's what builds the dread and stuff, isn't it? So I don't
entirely.
have a
Yeah,
problem with that.
yeah, absolutely. I suppose this one is, by definition, it's a gothic romance, which sounds really rubbish, and it's not as rubbish as that sounds. But it's based on The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, and it's also got some inspiration from some of his other books. And it's less horror oriented. I suppose there's less in the way of overt horror in this than Hill House, although I do have 2 episodes to go, and apparently episode 8 is real macabre.
Ooh.
But it's still got that dread. It's got the dread all the way through it, and it does have some great characters. You are immersed in the drama, and it also has Henry Thomas, who may turn up later in the podcast.
Ah,
When doesn't he? Always getting
yeah.
his way in. Henry again? Yeah, get out. Henry Thomas is one of the main actors, as he was in Hill House and indeed in other Mike Flanagan joints. Henry Thomas is playing an Englishman in this, and he appears to have based his accent on Prince Charles, which I find hilariously fun. But
And
he does
why
deliver
not?
a good performance nonetheless. Because it does have some wonky accents. I was thinking, because it's set in England, I think a couple of times, hang on a minute, you're not really British, are you? I can't tell, but I don't think you are. But it does also have some great performances, and it's got characters you don't mind hanging around with. You know that the narrative's unfolding at a certain pace, but I like that kind of style, and I'm thoroughly entranced by it. And like with Hill
Doesn't it
House,
have a?
oh sorry,
Yeah, I was going to say, doesn't it have a couple of the characters from Hill House? Does it have Luke and the mother?
it's got some actors. Yeah, it's got actors rather than characters. So it's
Oh,
set.
okay. They're
It's a
playing
totally
different
different story.
characters.
Yeah. So Henry
Okay.
Thomas, Carla Gugino, I think her name is, who pops up in loads of Flanagan stuff, and some other actors. I'm not sure their names, but yeah, there's some crossover for cast. Mike Flanagan hasn't directed all of these. I think he only directed one of them, but it's the same creative crew essentially. but a whole different story. So you can watch this without having seen Hill House, although if you've watched Hill House, it gives you an idea of the style of horror and gothic to expect, I suppose. It's being watched a lot. It's the number one Netflix thing. It comes up as the number one thing. I don't know what that means. I don't know if they track their viewers in the same way TV does, but yeah, it's doing well, so that's cool. Nice little thing to watch on Halloween or around Halloween. But yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, I'm saving that one up. I've got stuff to get through, but as soon as I have, I'm definitely onto that one.
Nice. Cool. Any other recommends? We were going to talk just briefly about podcast recommends, and I believe, actually, Sarah, you have a really good one to shout about.
Oh, yeah, I'm very excited. Yeah, that was it for all my recently watched, but yes, I do have some podcast that I've really definitely deserves a mention. I've been listening to it. I've basically blitzed all 2 seasons of it very, very quickly. I'd finished a podcast, I think it was the Eli Roth documentary ones that he'd done that you told me about. So I checked them out and I was like, I've got nothing else to listen to, so I need to find myself something. I literally just put in my search bar horror podcasts and this one came up and it's called Horror Hill. It is from the people that create Simply Scary podcasts, and it's a spin-off from the popular Chilling Tales for Dark Night podcasts, which also have their popular YouTube channel as well. So it's a multiple story horror-themed audio storytelling podcast. The stories are voiced by an absolutely amazing person. He's a voice actor and an illustrator. His name's Jason Hill, hence the reason why it's called Horror Hill. And he has just got one of the best voices ever. You can tell that he is a voice actor because he can do all the different accents. He does a really good English accent, actually. He does some good female accents as well. But yeah, he's very emotional. He really draws you in, and he has a really amazing little spiel that he does at the beginning of every episode. Has a very Vincent Price sounding laugh. And he just basically takes submissions from all sorts of authors from horror and thriller genre, either independent or previously published, and he will read their stories out each episode. And sometimes, depending on how short the stories are, he'll have 2 or 3 stories in an episode. The episodes run on 2.5 hours, something like that. And there is just something for everyone on there. Horror Hill actually first started in February 2018. So it hasn't been going all that long, but it has 24 episodes in every season. And we've literally just started season 3. Season 2 didn't start until the beginning of this year, so they had a bit of a break. But I'm guessing because of the whole COVID thing, they just blitzed loads and have started season 3 already. And it's just really awesome. There's something for everyone, and there's some really creepy stuff, there's some really funny stuff, there's some just absolutely bizarre stories, some standout episodes for me. One of the first episodes I heard, which was the middle of season 2, so it's season 2 episode 5, titled Drawn and Cornered, taken from a book from author Nick Botic called Daughter's Drawings. That creeped me out, something chronic, that did. I was listening to it, I think, when I was doing the housework, and I'd left the Hoover at the top of the stairs, and I was turning around listening to the story. I literally turned around and just kind of saw the shadow of the Hoover at the corner of my eye. Absolutely shat myself just because I was listening to that. It's really creepy. There's been some other really great ones. Season 1, episode 5 and 6 was an extra long story because he does sometimes do novellas, called The Body Farm by Brian Martinez. That's another really creepy story that takes a while to get going. You think it might be a zombie thing, but then it turns out to be more of a kind of Frankenstein thing, which is really cool. And I think I sent you and Pete episode 10 from season 1 because one of the stories on there was called The Girl Who Loved Bruce Campbell. And it's basically about a girl that's obsessed with Ash Williams, and she has a kind of Evil Dead experience of her own. So many good things. And I've discovered so many authors and stuff through him. There's some other really great people. Kevin David Anderson has some great stories. T.W. Grimm, Luciano Morano, he does some really good stuff called Storybook Gothic, where he turns fairy tales into horror stories. There's some really good ones in there. And Soren Narnia, there's been quite a few of his stories featured as well.
That's cool.
Definitely, everyone needs to check it out because it's absolutely brilliant. And even people that don't like horror, I've got one of my friends from work into it, and she absolutely adores it. And she won't sit and watch a horror movie, but she can quite happily sit and listen to him. And everyone loves being read stories. Audiobooks are great because if you don't have time to read, then I'm always listening to it when I'm doing housework and stuff like that. It definitely takes your mind off that and keeps you interested. You can hear the story and just learn stuff and new people. It's just really great. I love it to bits.
That sounds awesome. What's it called again?
It's Horror Hill Podcast.
Horror Hill Podcast, cool. And it's available through the usual outlets, isn't it? I've seen it on Spotify. I need to just listen to it.
Yeah, I listen to it through Spotify. I'm sure it's on others. Because they also feature Jason Hill stories from Horror Hill on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel as well.
Nice. That sounds great. I think that stuff is big right now. A big part of podcasting in the horror world is fiction, isn't it? It's like you said, the equivalent of audio books and radio plays brought up to date. Perfect time of year for it. Autumn, winter, I think, is the perfect time to have the headphones on. And like you said, if you're doing something boring, you can be transported and
absolutely.
don't mind. You actually look forward. That's how I've done it with podcasts. You look forward to the washing up because it's 20 minutes or so of totally immersed in this other thing.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what I do.
Nice. That's cool. I'm gonna make a promise and check at least one episode out by next time because I really should. I've been wanting to for a while. Cool. Podcast wise, I want to recommend just something I've recently started getting into. Podcast wise, not anything weird, don't worry. And it's a show called Homos on Haunted Hill, which is really fun. Well, I'm an early days listener, so as always, I've missed the boat and started something that everybody else and all the kids and stuff are probably talking about already. But this is the podcast by two people, as far as I can tell, only knew each other through Facebook or Twitter or something before they said, we seem to be getting along, let's do a podcast together. And one of them is Chris Moore, the very talented director, ridiculously talented director of Triggered, but not that one, and Blessed Are the Children, which is really awesome. He's made 3 feature films, I think, and all 3 of them are really cool. They're all really low budget, but he's got such imagination. He's a big fan of things like John Carpenter and 70s horror. Now he's got a podcast that he's hosting with Kevin Jones, and it's really good. As you may guess from the title, it's 2 gay men that are talking about horror movies. And to give an idea of the sense of humour and the style of the podcast, the most recent episode, which I haven't heard, is called The Seamany Serum of Michael Myers, Halloween 6, the producer's cut. And the podcast is great because it does have this fabulous take on horror films that we all know and love. There's one on Halloween H2O called Another Glass of Chardonnay. So it's just, there's so many great things. You Shut Your Bitchy Mouth is I think it's about the witch film Superstition. I think I haven't got around. Teeth Cleaning's in Vegas is their episode about the Stepfather remake. They're hilariously funny. I listened to a great one about the 80s slasher film The Initiation with Vera Miles from Psycho 2, which we're going to be talking about, and it's hilarious. Lots of talks about shoulder pads and things like that. So it's a while ago I listened to Scream Queens, which was I've forgotten his last name. It was Patrick, this fabulously funny gay guy that was talking about slasher movies, and again it gives it a fresh slant. A lot of podcasts, a lot of horror reviewing generally is by straight white men. Let's face it. So I think it's so awesome that podcasting especially gives an outlet to all sorts of people, and it gives you that fresh slant on it. Similarly, The Hysteria Continues, which is a long-running slasher podcast, has 3 gay white men and 1 straight white man. And again, it gives a great group dynamic. They're all really funny as well. If you're looking for a funny but insightful podcast, looking at the sort of titles that we'd probably cover on here, retro titles largely, then Homos on Haunted Hill is a safe bet. Check it out. They're up to 25 episodes now, but they started during the pandemic, so I think they started around March or April, and it's tremendous light relief. It really is the sort of podcast that you want to listen to give yourself a bit of a chuckle. So nice. Check it out because it's screamingly funny, actually, and I don't use that term lightly. In fact, I might start using it more. So we'll update you with what we've been watching in the interim over Halloween and all that kind of stuff next episode. And probably a couple of titles from Fright Fest that I'm going to check out as well. But without further ado, we're going to be dipping into a stone cold classic. So, Retro Rewind was set up to cover a real contrast of the obscure or the low budget and scruffy, like the Corpse Grinders, to the classics, like The Shining, which we did last time. But they don't come much more classic than Psycho, which is 60 years young this year, and is about as spry as any 60-year-old that you could meet. So we're going to be going through the Psycho franchise briefly, but mostly we're going to be talking about Psycho, which, let's face it, any excuse to rewatch Psycho is to be taken. So, 1960. This is clearly one of the great horror films. It's usually described as the first modern American horror film, which it's not really. I mean, there's things that precede it, like The Seventh Victim from the 40s is a very modern horror film. It has a shower scene as well, which I would suggest Hitchcock was probably inspired by. There's a famous French horror film called Les Diaboliques from 1954 that Hitchcock was definitely inspired by, which has a terrifying scene in a bathroom. So there is precedent for this, but it was unprecedented for Hitchcock. You know, he's making these massive, colourful Hollywood blockbusters like North by Northwest. He had dealt with psychopaths in films like Rope and Shadow of a Doubt before, but he was this grungy, effectively for the time gory, sleazy for the time, black and white film made in 1960 using the crew from his TV show Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and based on a really grubby novel about, in that case, in the book's case, about a middle-aged weirdo that cuts the head off Marion Crane in the shower rather than just stabs her. And itself inspired by Ed Gein, the famous 50s serial killer. So it's really quite exceptional, and of course has been imitated beyond belief for the last 60 years and still is imitated. How many shower scenes have you seen, Sarah, that are clearly a variation on Psycho shower scene? It's just endless.
So many, so many, especially slasher films. It's their go-to scare, isn't it? But none will ever seem quite as effective as that one.
They do, yeah, absolutely. And some of them are bonkers. Like there's a film called Dogs. This is a bit of a tangent. There's a film called Dogs, which is about killer dogs, funnily enough. And I think they changed
in showers.
Yeah, there's a sequence in Dogs. I've forgotten the actress's name, but where a character is stalked by effectively a dog subbing for Norman Bates. It's almost the same kind of shots. You think, oh no, they've remade the shower scene with a dog, with a Doberman or something. This is
wearing a wig and a dress.
Yeah, dressed up as his mother. Hello. So yeah, it goes on, and it's been parodied. The thing is, we'll come back to the film, but the thing is, I think even it's the famous thing, it's the classic thing, isn't it? Even if you haven't seen The Shining, you know the line, "Here's Johnny." Even if you haven't seen, and my daughter hasn't seen Psycho yet, give it time. But she knows that you know, she knows that's someone being kind of violently killed, just as she knows do is the Twilight Zone, but she's never seen the Twilight Zone. So this has crossed over way beyond horror fans. It's now a classic film, but whether you've seen it or not, you kind of know it without realizing you know it, if that makes sense. So that's how important.
Same with Norman Bates as well. You know, he's become this kind of behemoth character when people probably only really know the shower scene.
Yeah, exactly.
If they haven't seen the rest of it, they don't quite understand him as a person. What kind of annoys me about people that, you know, they just go on about that particular moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the moment has overwhelmed the film, really, because when you watch the film, so much about it is impressive, and we know the shower scene so well, and you know, it's probably lost a bit of impact because it's been copied so much, but actually when you watch it, it's still like, gee, you know, this is still a ferociously good sequence. But
very well acted,
amazing, and everything surrounding it is so good, and when you rewatch it, everything is funnier than you remember. Everything is weirder, and everything is so clearly set up so cleverly for where it's going. But of course, when you watch it the first time, you're like, what? So we're in classic territory, the kind of horror film that's parodied by The Simpsons and that children know without having watched the film. So let's go from the start. I mean, the start sets the tone, but at the same time, it totally misleads you into where it's going. I think what's cool is that almost as if to say this is a modern horror film, it comes up with a location and a date and time stamp at the first, whether it's relevant that we know it's Friday, December the 11th or not. You know, it's still saying, oh, hey, this is happening right now, effectively, to people watching it at the time. And the first thing you hear is the score. in the title sequence, which is this very, even before the shower scene, which has got the most piercing bit of music, but it's still very aggressive at the start, isn't it? The very first
it's great.
beat. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose we'll come to it, but I think when I rewatched Psycho 4, what highlighted so much about what Psycho, the original, does so well is that Psycho 4 reuses. It's the only sequel to directly reuse all of the major themes from Psycho.
Yeah.
But it misses the point. You know, you can just strap anything in there, but it's not going to work the same way.
Well, yeah, sometimes you kind of think like the only thing familiar with Psycho 4 is the music and the one-liners. They're like, oh yeah, we're from this franchise, remember? We might be completely different, but yeah, we will go on about 4 because we have,
so we'll
get
come back
to it.
Let's not spoil the exciting climax there. Psycho 4, the beginning. Oh God, it's the beginning.
The beginning of the end. Thank God.
Praise Jesus. Yeah, so Psycho, I mean, Psycho's famous for many things, but it was kind of shocking at its time because it opens with a blatant thing about this couple that are shacked up in a cheap hotel and having lots of tawdry sex. And the opening is kind of sleazy and sexy, isn't it? It's shirtless John Gavin, who's quite attractive. John Gavin?
Yeah.
Janet Leigh is in her bra. Of course, initially it's a white bra because she's tainted it later on and she has a black one after she's stolen some money. So
it's more mysterious. Change the bra.
Yeah. There's strange 60s bras. Yeah, I don't quite. And I suppose they're not the massively intimidating torpedo ones that I suppose were late 50s, weren't they? I tried on a few. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of sleazy even. These secret liaisons between what will become our heroine and a character who initially seems relatively irrelevant but becomes more relevant later on. But I quite like how it starts because it does feel like you're eavesdropping. The camera even moves into the room, doesn't it? It's
yeah, like a fly on the wall type thing.
Yes.
I didn't necessarily get a kind of sleazy. Well, I suppose they'd kind of like gone off on their lunch breaks to kind of get together, but she's not happy about it. She doesn't want to do that anymore, does she?
No, she's fed up. And I suppose the dialogue's very suggestive. Like she talks about licking stamps because he's paying his ex-wife's alimony, isn't he? And there's a real bitterness from her end that I'll just be the 2:00 lunch hour person or whatever. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, she's miserable, so she's really unhappy, which will tie into a brilliant sequence later on where she and Norman, when she finally gets to the Bates Motel, talk about being trapped. Essentially, it all ties together really well. But I think this in 1960 for an audience used to the kind of love scene where somebody had to have one foot on the floor.
And the shirt done up right up to the collars. Yeah, true. Yeah, I suppose that could have been a little bit taboo, a little bit sexy.
I think so. Yeah, there's European films before Psycho that are raunchy and even have nudity in them, but Hollywood films less so. They were pretty chaste. A bit of closed mouth kissing was about as much as you got. It's and then so that's the opening sequence. So Marion's having this fairly joyless affair with this handsome but not especially exciting guy, really.
No.
And then we have the office scene. So the introduction of like her workplace, which is crucial to her story, but ultimately, like the money stealing itself, will be totally irrelevant when the real story starts, which is genius.
Yes, absolutely genius. It's the best thing about it. I just love it.
Absolutely. It's 50 minutes till the shower scene. So the first 50 minutes of the film is this probably would you say it's the greatest misdirection of all time in a film like this? It's just fabulous, isn't it?
Yeah. In terms of, the way it goes from there, I think her actual stealing of the money and stuff is ridiculously shifty. Very, very shifty, but she tries her best.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like the office scene. In fact, I like all of the non-horror stuff in this because it is so well done. And I like the fact that there's not really Norman is the only sympathetic male character in this because the other men in this are kind of seamy and patronising.
Yeah.
Her boss is old and a bit of a twat, and there's who's the guy? He's the guy that's doing a deal with the boss, isn't he? The kind of slightly lecherous client.
Yeah, really kind of like vixen and loud and just basically shouting about how much money he has. So she's kind of like, oh, you ain't going to miss this 40 grand then, are you?
Yeah, perfect. And so, yeah, absolutely. And we're immediately on
And
her
why not?
side.
Yeah, absolutely. You're like, just do it, love. Go, run.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And for because Hitchcock's often slated for being sexist or misogynist, which I'd always question that. I mean, you could argue obviously both sides, but I think the sympathetic characters in this are the quite effeminate Norman Bates and the unfortunate heroine who disappears halfway through because of Norman Bates. Because everybody else isn't very nice. The highway cop with the sunglasses.
Oh, yeah, he's just really creepy and just dodgy. And the car salesman,
Yeah, the car
they're
salesman.
kind of not really. They're just like they just sell her a car and ask no questions.
Yeah, and
But that's
yeah.
how you want it to go. I did love Caroline, the young girl in the office
Oh yeah, which is Pat
who's
Hitchcock.
played
Yes.
Pat Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock's daughter. She's a funny little character. She's only in there for a little while, but she comes up with some funny little lines.
She's lovely, isn't she? Yeah, she's really sweet. I think that's it. I think those small characters, in this case, yeah, it's just one scene, isn't it?
Mm.
They're so important because they humanise the plight of Marion. It makes it a fairly convincing workplace. And I like the stuff with the used car salesman, who's slightly off. The highway cop's really off. I mean, he's more menacing than Norman ever is. There's something very sinister about the way he looks at her.
Yeah, very creepy. But once again, he just disappears again, doesn't he? You don't really see him.
Absolutely.
You're misleaded into thinking that he's going to follow her, but he doesn't.
Yes, yes. So there's a whole story here that just decides it's not going to be about that anymore. But you're totally
Yeah,
with it. Oh, Christ, you outrun that guy, and then the suspense is kicked in long before we're aware of the threat that comes to her much later, because you're following her so closely and rooting for her so much. It's really tense, even though nothing massive or horrific is yet happening. So that's really cool. I always really love the drive, like Marion's drive with the money and her internal kind of narration or her thoughts of what's probably happening, the conversations that might be
yeah,
happening.
yeah, absolutely. It definitely kind of makes you can definitely see how torn she is as to whether
Yeah,
she is just going to go, oh, sod it, I can't do this and go back. But then she really wants to go and see Sam, and she thinks it's going to work somehow. And she's only spent, what, $700 of it on this new card. She didn't want to be recognised in her old one. So it's not too bad that she's done that. If she wanted to just turn back, she could. Yeah, there's all this going through her head. And
yeah,
then it just chucks it down with rain, doesn't it? So she has to stop and find herself somewhere to stay.
yeah, absolutely. And the great symmetry of this film is that Marion Crane arrives at the Bates Motel in a shower of rain and obviously leaves in a shower.
You
A bit of,
notice that throughout the whole franchise, though, it's always raining there. There
yes,
is a
yes,
scene in every single one of those movies where it's absolutely pissing it down.
torrential rain. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, absolutely, it's brilliant. And the first appearance of Norman Bates at Bates Motel, which is great introduction to the Bates Motel for the first time. 12 cabins, 12 vacancies.
Yeah.
um, and quite sad as well. This waning business in modern America because they put a highway through it, or it's the decline of small businessmen, I suppose.
Yeah.
And he's tremendous. Obviously, Anthony Perkins was sort of known at this time. Janet Leigh was a big star already, which is why it was so shocking that she was to be the star of this, and yet she disappears halfway through.
Mm.
Norman Bates, or Anthony Perkins rather, was still very young and was kind of an up-and-coming star. And this became his defining performance. And from the very moment he appears, I mean, he is Norman Bates, obviously, and we know him so well now as that, but it's such a clever performance. And all the little details. He's not able to say the word bathroom when he's showing around cabin one.
Yeah. He's just so nervous, just so sweet.
Yeah, he really is. He's charmingly nervous. Yeah, absolutely. And you totally feel for him. And the little homely sayings, I suppose, like "trusty umbrella," is lovely. It's a lovely touch. One of my favourite things about Psycho, and I think when you watch it on repeat viewings, the smaller scenes or the quieter scenes stand out, is the chat they have in the parlour between them, which goes on for quite long for a modern film, I suppose. Horror films, mainstream horror films, don't tend to have long dialogue scenes these days, but this one does, and it works so well, I think. What are your thoughts on that sequence? I think it's an amazing sequence.
Yeah, it becomes quite awkward at times, doesn't it? The
Yeah.
way, she's suggesting that, because obviously she thought that she heard Norman's mother chastising him before he came down, so she's trying to get, from him how he feels about that, and maybe suggesting that he should send his mother to a home, and he suddenly gets incredibly defensive about it, doesn't he? But he doesn't want, but because he's so sweet and so nervous, he doesn't want to upset anyone, so he does it all in a way it's still quite hurtful with some of the things that he says, but he does it in such a nice way. It's just quite awkward and unnerving.
It really is.
For both of them. And also the very first, moment of it when he says he's going to fix her some supper and he just brings her, a little sandwich and some milk is really sweet.
It is, because that's his idea of, he is a boy, he's lost in time.
Yeah.
That's all he knows. Yeah, that's an incidental detail. It was kind of carried over to the next film, but here especially works so well. And easily missed maybe on the first viewing when you're so wrapped up in the tension of what's going on and what might happen to her. That's great. I always loved the thing with the birds, the stuffed birds, all of the pictures of birds.
Yeah.
Perhaps setting up Hitchcock's next film, which of course was not dogs. And the very suggestive dialogue is very Hitchcocky. I mean, this is written by Joseph Stefano from Robert Bloch's book, although the book is pretty different in terms of tone and style. But it's all very suggestive. A son is a poor substitute for a lover, and of course the famous "a boy's best friend is his mother," which is terribly sad in this context, because she quickly cottons onto the fact that he has no friends and indeed no life outside of this old hotel, which itself is fading away. But the shift is super tense, where quite harmlessly, and probably the kind of thing that any of us would do, Marion just wants to say something like, "Oh, maybe she should go someplace. Your mum seems quite poorly,"
Yeah.
But that's such a tense moment. Although again, kind of relieved a little bit, especially when you watch it again, you know exactly what's happened or what's going to happen. And he says she's as harmless as one of those stuffed birds. And of course, something in Psycho 4 we later see is Norman literally stuffing his mum, which we didn't need to see, actually, because I think so much of this, and perhaps why Psycho 4 is pointless, so much about this is suggested, and it works so much better when it's suggested, when you don't see Mother, when you just hear her. And even then, you get
to make up in your mind how she is or how she was with him. You don't need it spelled out for you.
Yeah, because he does that so well, doesn't he? He suggests that so well. It's just tremendous. I think that sequence is great, and it does have another famous line: "We all go a little mad sometimes," which was well used by the end of Scream, amongst many others. But it is an iconic line, absolutely fabulous. So, what happens next, Sarah? Where does it go from here?
Oh well, from there she goes back to her room. Everything gets a little bit tense, so she goes back to her room and. First she hides her money. She tries to figure out where she's going to hide her money, doesn't she? She goes to all sorts of different places, and then she kind of sees the Bible on the side, and she's once again that gets her kind of thinking, should she be doing this? In the end, she wraps it up in a newspaper and puts it really obviously on the desk, and thinks to herself, right, I'm just going to go to bed and head home in the morning, but first I'm going to have a shower. So off she goes to the shower, and little does she know is that Norman has one of his lovely bird pictures removed from the wall, and you can actually see there's a little hole masked by the wallpaper, very cleverly, isn't it? So you can't actually see the hole from that room. And he watches her go into the shower. I don't think it's anything pervy, though, is it?
No, I think that's
from Norman's point of view, he's just trying to find a moment when he can go put on the wig and the dress and head in there, or his mother is talking to him in his head again, basically calling her a slut and all that kind of thing. But you think to yourself that he's not actually doing it for any pervy reasons.
No, and that's
he's doing it to buy himself some time. Yeah,
and there's a real tragedy, isn't there, for both of them, really, because when they have their chat at the end of it, he talks of seeing her in the morning, as you would, and you believe
making her breakfast or something. Yeah,
because at that point he's Norman, and he's he's thinking you'll see in the morning, but then he's obviously overwhelmed by the mother half. And you're right, one of the great things that, and great as in awful, that the Psycho remake by Gus Van Sant gets so horribly wrong, and it is, it's one of the worst things that's ever existed. Well, it's strangely watchable. Is that in this very sequel? I mean, if anyone hasn't seen it, Psycho, the 1998 version, is an almost shot-for-shot remake using the same script in colour with a bunch of modern actors, seemingly designed by people too stupid to watch a film in black and white. And with this scene with the peephole, as Sarah's just quite rightly said, it totally misunderstands it, because in that sequence, Vince Vaughn playing Norman Bates, Vince Vaughn is Norman Bates. He's not, but he is in the Psycho remake. Vince Vaughn goes through the same motions, but one of the few additions to the old script is that you can hear him masturbating. So,
really?
So you do get the joyous sound effects of Vince Vaughn having a wank while he watches Anne Hesh, who isn't, but is in the remake, Marion Crane. So I think maybe that says, and I hadn't thought about this until you were just talking about the fact that he's not getting off on this. He's doing the process, the mother process. And that's perhaps all you need to know about the remake and how catastrophically it misunderstands the whole point of the original.
That's terrible.
Anyway,
that's shocking.
I know, and I do want you to watch it. I know you haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it.
So we can get angry about it.
Yeah,
together.
yeah, absolutely. Especially now after that bit.
Yeah, I've probably spoiled the remake. But so the shower scene, I mean, there's not much. A whole documentary has been made about the shower scene. Technically, it's an amazing piece of work. There's nothing like it in terms of how it's put together from many very, very short, often less than a second shots. 7852 is the name of the documentary, if anybody wants to see a really good documentary just about the shower scene and about its impact and about how it was made. There's loads of stories, some of which have entered legend about, did Hitchcock direct it, did he not, was Anthony Perkins there, was he not, and etc. And they've generally been cleared up over time. But it's just a great sequence, and it still shocks. I mean, it's not gory, but for the time it's pretty explicit in terms of what you think is nudity, although you don't really see any nudity. And of course the sound effects and the rapid shots of the knife itself, and the music, of course, which is everything to it, and is really jarring. Even though you know it so well, it's still really jarring to listen to. And I think just the aftermath is probably just as shocking as well when you watch it on a repeat viewing. That really terribly sad shot of her eye that slowly pulls back from it.
Yeah, that's the best bit about it. I mean, like you say, I mean, it's an iconic scene, but I don't quite know how you could do a documentary just about that one scene and really go into so much detail. It is what it is. Yes. It's very well done. I mean, she acts really, really well in that bit. There's a lot of people that can fudge that kind of stuff up, but she seems, to do it really well. And as you say, it's virtually bloodless. You literally just see some blood going down the plug hole, don't you? It's not splattering everywhere. It's just the way she does it. And the fall, pulling down the shower curtain and then falling on the floor. And then, just seeing her eyes and pulling back from that. That's the best bit about it. Yeah.
And it's also at that point in the film where you've followed her journey, her journey, and she's clearly decided that she's kind of done the wrong thing, and they've had a chat, and she's presumably thinking of going back to Phoenix in the morning and somehow sorting it out. And then the cruelest bit is maybe the camera panning to the money on the table, which of course in just a moment or two will end up in the swamp. It's totally pointless.
It's another misleading thing. You think, is Norman gonna discover this money?
Yeah.
But no, he doesn't. He comes back and discovers her, doesn't he? Because I think he blacks out for the times that he's mother, so he doesn't really think that he's done it. He knows that this has happened and it's due to mother, and he has to now clean it up. So that's basically what he does, doesn't he? He sets about cleaning things up and just getting rid of all her stuff. He doesn't think to look in anything. He just picks up anything that doesn't belong in the room, puts it in the car and pops it in the swamp, and that's the last you hear about the money.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and the other thing the film does is after 50 minutes we've followed Marion's story. It now does the extraordinary, again, probably for the time even more so, extraordinary shift in its narrative because it now follows separate story paths. So for a while we're actually following it from Norman's perspective. It's Norman's story. Suddenly, oh,
Mm.
Marion's gone. It's Norman's story because now we're rooting for him. We have an inkling that Mother's the killer, maybe, but
Hmm.
now we're really with him. We want him to be able to get away with this because he's painstakingly getting rid of the body. He's mopping up the bath. He's nervously chewing on the candy corn, which is one of his kind of trademarks, I suppose. And especially when we watch the car seemingly stop sinking in the swamp, we want it to sink because we do want him to get.
Yeah,
We like him, you know.
yeah, yeah. We want him to get away with it. We don't want them to find out. And yeah, you're
Absolutely.
like, oh my god, it's not going to sink, and then it kind of goes down again, and everyone just goes, oh, thank God, he's
So
safe. It's okay.
yeah,
Don't worry, Norman. You're going to be okay.
and that's the genius of it. The genius of it. If this is our first viewing, I mean, we don't realise the truth, but we know
No,
he's an awfully downtrodden, lonely man, and we really like
yeah,
him.
it's not his fault. He's just so sweet and so lovely. You just want
Exactly.
to cuddle him.
You do, and the nervous smile he gives when the car does sink eventually. You know,
Yeah.
that's such a nice little moment as well. It's slightly maybe disturbing, but it's very very empathetic to everything about him.
Hmm.
Um, and then the shift is to Arbogast's story. So someone who hasn't been in the film up to this point is now looking for the missing Marion. So, and for a while, it becomes almost a kind of procedural thing with him, and the movie takes on almost his point of view as he goes to the motel after kind of getting Sam and Lila involved. Lila being Marion's sister,
Sister, yeah.
and he's in a very modern film. I always thought of him as a real holdover, including the way he's dressed, a holdover of like detectives from Bogart movies of the 1940s. He feels
Yeah.
slightly out of time to everything else is really modern,
Yeah.
I guess, apart from Newman. Um,
Yeah.
so he's this old-fashioned, dogged private eye who also doesn't get what he wants. You know, he's in a fruitless pursuit of the money, which is now gone anyway,
Hmm.
and the movie cares not a jot about him because he's polished off relatively quickly.
Hmm.
But there's another great sequence. I think it's one of those great dialogue scenes where Norman is confronted by Arbogast at the motel, and that's another great Norman sequence, isn't it?
Yes. Sorry. Which bit? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Where Arbogast shows up at the motel.
Oh yes. Yeah. What? And he actually goes up to the house and tries to find the mother.
Yes, as you
Yeah.
would.
Actually, well, yeah. I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. He doesn't make it very far. He makes it up to the top of the stairs, I think, doesn't he?
Yes, yeah, he does because there's a great overhead shot at the top of the stairs where the door is opened, and you get a glimpse of the mother thing
Hmm.
coming out. Some really nice moments, some nice little moments, even in the dialogue scene at the motel, where the camera does this strange thing of kind of tracking down from Norman's Adam's apple as he leans over, and it's this again this great vulnerable stuttery sequence with Norman who gets a bit too defensive, especially when Arbogast suggests that she probably fooled him by checking in under a fake name, you know, so that
Oh yeah.
which is all quite uncomfortable and highlighting, I suppose, his naivety, which he takes offence to because there's a sense that Norman is really wounded and he's obviously been bullied effectively by his mother and
Hmm.
possibly other people as well.
Yeah.
If only there was a whole movie that showed us that explicitly, even though we didn't ask for it. Maybe they'll make
Yeah. Exactly.
one day.
One
What do you
day.
think? What do you think about Arbogast's murder? I mean, it's the second and last on-screen murder in Psycho. Later on, you realise that apparently Norman killed 7 women
Yeah.
over time. What's your thoughts on the less famous but the only other murder in the film?
Oh, yeah, I think it's very effective. I think they did it better in that one than they did in. Was it Psycho 2? There was another. Oh, no, Psycho 3 was the stair killing, wasn't it? It worked
Yes.
better. It worked better in the original with Arbogast than it did for Maureen, as it turned out. It
Yeah.
didn't. It didn't look quite as good. But yeah, in the first one, I think it was. It was obviously it's not as iconic as the shower scene. But
Sure.
I think it was very effective.
It is good, isn't it? And it's quite, again, I think quite ahead of its time is the rig that they fitted
Mm-hmm.
the camera to, which makes us kind of fall down the stairs at the same time as he heads
Mm.
backwards. So technically, it's great, and it's got that classic, I suppose, suspense trope of someone climbing some stairs very slowly, and you're just waiting for something to come out of the top. I think it's one of the great stair climbs in horror. The best climbing stairs horror movie is still The Exorcist, because so much of that film is about, no, don't go up the stairs. Oh, he's going up the
Yeah.
stairs. Oh, don't go in her room. Oh, he's in her room. Oh God. And of course, eventually someone falls down those big stairs outside. Yeah, yeah, I think it's a great sequence. He's an interesting actor. It's a great cast. Martin Balsam's really good in this, and he's in Cape Fear as well, which was just a couple of years away. And Vera Miles is, of course, Lila Loomis, who, I mean, it makes sense, I suppose, in Psycho 2 that she's how she is, but she's not a particularly sympathetic character in this, really, is she? She's a slightly aloof kind of figure compared to Marion, who we got to know and like.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, she's just kind of very just one mind. You know, she just wants to know what happened to her sister, and she's adamant that, well, because she's a bit opposed to Arbogast to start off with, isn't she? Because he
Yeah,
was
there was a
hired
tension.
by her boss
Yeah,
for the money. Yeah, so he basically kind of like, because obviously he goes for Sam, doesn't he? So he kind of like seeming to think that Sam knows that something's happened when he has no clue, and Lila's kind of in the same boat. She's gone to Sam to try and find out if he knows where she is, and then they all kind of like end up tracking her down to Bates Motel at almost the same kind of time.
yeah,
So she is adamant that she needs to find out what happened, and she's definitely sure that Norman's something to do with it. So she once again, after Arbogast's demise, decides she goes up to the house as well. Then doesn't she? She gets Sam to kind of sit and talk to him so she can climb up to the house and find out what's going on. Does she discover Mother? I can't remember now.
yes. It's Lila that goes into the cellar ultimately and finds
That's it, yeah.
Arthur in the chair. Yeah, she's the one. So that's the other shift. You know, we thought the heroine was Marion, but actually, after a fashion, it's this other character that's only introduced about an hour in, which is again a real break from what people would have been expecting. It's really interesting. I always wished I could have been around in 1960 and watched this fresh off the bat. That's probably in the top three films I wish I'd have been around for. And I mean, the hints are all there. It's signpost. When you watch it again, you realise how cleverly signposted it is, even down to things like Marion literally saying this is the last time that she's going to meet up with Sam
Yeah.
in their sexy time, and of course it is. And all the stuff with Norman in the early scene where he's talking about, she's not a maniac, well, actually, she's as harmless as those stuff birds. So it's all really signposting its way, but especially knowing my inability seemingly to guess the most obvious of plot twists, I really don't think in a million years I would have figured out where this was going if this was 1960 and I was watching it for the first time, when
Same, yeah.
famously
Yeah.
it was kept a big secret.
Yeah.
Do you feel the
Yeah.
same? I mean, do you think you would have had any idea?
No, I would have just been like, I was like, well, where is this Mother? And we need to see her. It's like, I can hear her, and you can see her sitting in the window, and you definitely think that is definitely a woman that's killing people. And then right at the end, when Norman tries to kill Sam and Lila, you find him in the wig and the dress, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
And the Mother in the cellar, obviously. You're like, but hang on, how is she talking?
Oh,
Then you have the bit at the end, obviously, like they find out Norman attacks them as Mother. They manage to like beat him down, and he gets captured and shipped off to the nut house, basically, doesn't he? And then you have a psychotherapist at the end that basically spells it all out for you. And at the end, I'm like, oh, thank God! Now it all makes perfect sense. I was like, I knew he wasn't evil. I knew he was just this sweet little troubled guy. But yeah, he does spell everything out for you. So he's got these two personalities, and the Mother's taken over. And I'm like, what? He's doing the Mother's voice? Yep. Okay, now I kind of understand. I was like, wow, okay.
yeah, I love that. The The famous psychiatrist, summing up, is often like singled out. I think it's William Friedkin, who of course loves this film and rightly says it's maybe the greatest horror film of all time. But he also says that the psychiatrist sequence is absolutely awful. However,
No, I don't think so. I
no,
think
me either.
it explains absolutely everything. I'm like, oh, okay.
I think
Anything,
so.
everything is covered right at the end there. You understand absolutely everything by then.
He's one step short of bringing on like a thing, isn't he? Like a flip chart, right? So,
Yeah, diagram and
all
a
right,
pointy stick.
so
The brain is here.
I like that, and it's actually no. So I think, given Hitchcock's sense of humour, which is extremely dark, I would imagine, and I think there is some arguments that have been made that this, in a way, was intended to be funny. Like a lot of the film is meant to be funny. You know, things like Mother saying, "I will not hide in the fruit cellar. You think I'm fruity, huh?" You know that it's full of I guess, in a way, sick jokes. You know, really dark
Yeah,
jokes given
I
what's
suppose
going on.
like
People
you're
are
saying
dying.
for the time.
Yeah, for the
Absolutely.
time.
I kind of I kind of forget. It's like, do you say 60 years old now? 60 years old. That's,
It's
times
mad.
were so different. Times were so different there. But,
I think it's a
watching it again recently, it still seems so relevant.
yeah. It really does, and I think if the psychiatrist sequence seems to be funny, I think part of it maybe but also was intended to be rather, but also it's absolutely needed in 1960, especially. Um, and I like that the characters, or a couple of the characters, take on the 1960 audience's point of view by asking things like, "Well, why was he dressed like that?" You know, and then
Yeah,
the other guy
yeah,
chips in by saying he's a transvestite. And it's, because in 1960, there wasn't a
yeah.
million different genders and sexualities.
No,
People were as naive about this as Norman is naive about almost everything.
yeah. Mental
Um,
health issues, and people didn't talk about what happened to them in their childhood, in their family life. You don't.
no,
As far as people are concerned, you're fine. You had a normal childhood just like everyone else. No one really discussed what happens and why.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Psychotherapy and everything was in its infancy, and yeah, Jesus, yeah, homosexuality or transvestism was something to be feared. And it's interesting that this film is so sympathetic to someone who's ultimately revealed to be a transvestite. We're not disgusted by Norman or by whatever he is. We're incredibly empathetic about it. But it's, of course, things later like Silence of the Lambs became enormously controversial because they were seen to be portraying transvestites or transsexuals as monstrous. But this one, out of all of them, is probably the most sympathetic, ironically, maybe, given when it was made. But yeah, that whole sequence, it does make me smile because it does go on for a long, and it is the Cliff Notes version of the plot. So,
Yeah,
but at the same time, it's no different to big twists in movies these days where they don't do something like that, but they usually do a massive long montage like the Sixth Sense or the Saw movies. You
yeah,
reach the
or just
twist point.
There's just this massive reveal, and at the end you're like, oh, everything makes sense.
Yeah.
It was kind of harder for them to do that in Psycho, so they had to just sit and explain it.
Yeah, really tricky in the technology at that time. So yeah, it's no different to that 5 minutes at the end of The Sixth Sense
Yeah.
where Bruce Willis was talking to himself. Oh yeah, so he's no one else can see it. Oh right, he's dead. Oh my god! And the Saw movies, which I love by the way, are
Yeah.
really guilty of that. It's like
Yes.
previously on Saw, this is what. Oh, you're right. Oh, I get it. Yeah, but it's the 15th Jigsaw accomplice. I get it. Yeah, I think it's tremendous. That sequence is part of the fun for me, and it leads to what maybe is one of the, well, if it isn't the greatest, it's got to be one of the greatest and creepiest and yet saddest final sequences in a horror film.
Oh yeah, his little grin.
Which, yeah, absolutely, and
If
the
you didn't, if you
voiceover.
Yeah, if you didn't love him before that, by the end you're just like, okay, I do really love him now. And it's like the only like slightly sinister thing he ever really does in the
Yeah, because
whole
he
movie. He
absolutely.
looks like it looks like he's been sat in the room and listened to the psychiatrist and gone, oh, that's why I'm like this.
At
And then
last.
evil grin. Now I know. Ha ha ha.
I think that's it. It's a really modern sequence. I mean, there's some nice things about it. I always miss the detail. I probably have seen it before and just forgotten, but in this viewing of it, I thought, oh, isn't it quite? Even though this is 1960, I don't know what the facility is going to be like where Norman's going to be spending a lot of time. But they brought him a blanket, so it's
Yeah.
not all bad.
No,
He
he's going
feels
to
a
be
little
well looked after.
Yeah. And the mother's taken over, and there's like you said, a shot that seems to go on for quite a long time, and the very modern choice to have him looking up straight at the camera, looking at us, and like you said, with the big grin on his face, and the fantastic almost subliminal shot of Mother's skull that's superimposed over his face, which again would have blown minds, or would have blown my mind in 1960.
Yeah, at the time, yeah.
Subliminal stuff, or obviously it's not really subliminal if you can see it, but near subliminal stuff became a big thing in horror. The Exorcist is famous for those very, very tiny flashes of Pazuzu's face, and Seven has that incredible ending where Gwyneth Paltrow's face is flashed up for, I guess, less than a second as Brad Pitt decides to kill the evil John Doe. But this was, again, the pioneer for that kind of closing sucker punch, I guess. And that is Psycho, and the final images, of course, of the car being dragged out of the swamp. So it ends back to Marion, which is where we came in, even though obviously in a rather different state of affairs than before. But yeah, it holds up. We sit here and probably say this on all of our retro showings, but I think this is probably the ultimate movie in terms of holding up incredibly well after all this time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the reason why we choose them for Retro Rewind, isn't it? Because they have held up so well. And we were talking about black and white movies a little bit earlier before we started recording, and it is, the ultimate black and white movie that you can just watch again and again.
Yeah, it really is.
The fact that it doesn't have any colour, and there's loads of people these days that won't watch black and white, but you don't need colour in that. It's the same with Night of the Living Dead. Two movies that I don't have a problem with watching in black and white. And the fact that I saw it in such great... It was a Blu-ray that I borrowed from you, Stephen, and it just looks so fantastic, so crisp, so clean, so modern. Even though it's from 1960s, it still looked fantastic.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. Night of the Living Dead is as essential in black and white as Dawn of the Dead is essential in colour, because Dawn of the Dead is a big splash of colour all the way through, and Night of the Living Dead is this very intense, small-scale zombie revolt where it's all claustrophobic and it looks like a newsreel from 1968.
And washed out, yeah.
Yeah. And
it needs
it's a
to be
bit
black
like
and white.
Sense of documentary style, isn't there, with both of them at times?
I think we need more black and white. They still need to... I know there are more modern black and white films out there, but I still think that's a thing. Should do more of. Yeah,
it doesn't happen enough. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a recent example. I'm sure there is one. But, I've got a great... Lighthouse. Yes, Lighthouse, the movie by Robert Eggers, is tremendous and could never be in colour. And again, it gives it this extra claustrophobia, which is such a part of Lighthouse especially. Yeah, but others, I'm sure, are available. So Psycho. Anything else to say on the original Psycho? I mean, that's probably covered it, I think.
Yeah, I think that is it, and then it's on to the next.
Yes. So, so Psycho, of course, immediately actually spawns a lot of imitations. It's only in 1961 when William Castle makes Homicidal, which has another cross-dressing plot twist and another, in this case, more graphic stabbing sequence. So it was being ripped off very quickly because it was such a sensational hit. And then, of course, the slasher genre comes along. A lot of the slasher genre is influenced by Italian horror films, Argento and Bay of Blood, but the Psycho influence is huge too. In fact, Halloween, not only does it have Janet Leigh's daughter, of course, but Halloween is very influenced by Psycho, just in John Carpenter's own style, of course, makes it feel more original than it really is. But it takes 22 years for Psycho 2 to come about. And it was soon after Hitchcock's death, interestingly enough. I never quite clarified if they almost had to wait for Hitchcock to die to make Psycho 2. It makes sense. It would be a brave filmmaker that makes Psycho 2 while he's still alive. Like, oh, God,
Maybe,
give it another
yeah, I
couple of years.
suppose.
Although, although
He's
it
gone,
is,
go.
yeah, you can imagine it. Can't you? On the news tonight. Oh, right, let's start rolling. It is interesting. Psycho 2 is made by a Hitchcock student that did meet with Hitchcock about, in his kind of fascination with Hitchcock. Richard Franklin, this Australian director who made a film called Patrick in the 70s. The only horror film ever with such an innocuous name as Patrick. I'm guessing Jeff was already taken. So Psycho 2 comes along in 1982, and it went through a lot of phases. They kind of had to bargain, I think, to get Anthony Perkins back. But of course, it had to have Anthony Perkins back. It's written by Tom Holland, who had become a really good director of Fright Night and Child's Play. And I think, I've always been a real fan of Psycho 2. I think it's a great script. I think it's probably as good as Psycho 2 could ever have been. Do you want to take us a bit through Psycho 2, Sarah, and the setup of the sequel?
Sure. Oh, thanks. Thanks for that. Even though we were talking about the fact that it probably has one of the most complicated plots.
Yeah, it's a little out of the ordinary.
It's very all over the place. But no, I agree. Psycho 2 is very good. And I love the fact that it is done 22 years later. And they state that fact, they've left it that amount of time. So Anthony Perkins has aged and, they haven't tried to recreate it, a few years later. Oh, it's 22 years later. They've actually done it 22 years later. And Norman has been released from his institution. He's been deemed legally sane. And the first scene we have is Norman in a courtroom being harassed by a woman who's protesting against his release, basically. And this woman turns out to be Lila Crane, yes, which was Marion's sister from the first one. But it appears now... And do you think this is a bit weird that they don't really mention it, but Lila is now married to Sam, who is Marion's lover. Yeah.
Which is a bit weird and almost incestuous,
so so her and Sam have, through Marion's death, got together and got married. But they then say, Sam is no longer with us. He died. So Lila's on her own, and she's protesting against the release of Norman, which comes to nothing because he gets released. He gets taken back to... Bates Motel and his house by his doctor, Dr. Raymond, who pops in from time to time, doesn't he, to keep a check and make sure Norman's on track. The hotel, or the motel rather, is being run by a very crazy guy played by Dennis Franz called Warren Toomey, Mr. Toomey, and he is crazy. He's not looking after the place. He's being a little bit dodgy about it. Norman puts up with this and goes back upstairs, and you can already see, he's once again, his lovely little nervous, sweet self, but you can tell he's a bit twitchy about returning to his old house, isn't he? There's layers of dust all over the place. I think he goes straight to his mother's room, doesn't he? And just kind of straight away kind of has a few flashbacks and stuff. But through his release, he's been given a job at a diner, which I'm guessing is kind of like a parole thing. He has to go into society or something.
Sure.
They don't really explain it all that well, do they? But he goes to a diner and he's met by this lovely little old lady called Mrs. Spool, who shows him around and shows him what he's going to be doing. He's basically washing dishes and stuff, and he meets a young waitress called Mary, who's having problems with her boyfriend, and he instantly, invites her back to his place, thinking he wanted to put her up in one of the rooms, but once they get there, they find that Mr. Toomey has basically turned the place into a drugs den, and Norman is furious, isn't he? He would not have anything of that sort at his place, so he fires Toomey and basically invites Mary to come and stay at the house, which I think is more for him than it is for her, so he has some company in this big empty house. Yeah. So it's already, there's quite a lot going on straight away, and people are turning up left, right and centre. All sorts of stuff is going on. I'm getting a bit lost on my pace now. But Mary stays over, and they strike up a friendship, don't they? He does his usual little thing of making them sandwiches. He's not the best feeder though, is he?
It's a toasted cheese sandwich, right? Or grilled cheese, yeah.
Oh, is it?
I think so.
He's going up in the world from bread and milk. But there's always got to be a glass of milk. It's always a glass
Yeah,
of
which
milk
is really
involved.
sweet, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
I guess a little boy's version of entertaining someone. That's very
But
sweet.
yeah, but it kind of things he starts hearing things. He starts getting notes, doesn't he? He gets into a bit of a fight with Toomey, who's really angry at him for being fired. He goes to the diner and starts like trying to spread rumours about Norman and Mary and things that, seedy things going on between them, which obviously is not happening, and Norman's really upset about. And then he starts seeing things. He gets seeing these little notes from Mother saying that Mary's a slut and stuff like that. And then he actually sees her in the window, doesn't he? He
Yes.
sees a figure that looks like his mother in the window of his house, and he starts to get himself really freaked out. He does speak to the doctor, doesn't he, about his concerns, but we're still not sure what's going on. And as things go on, you kind of find out that Mary, who calls herself Mary Samuels, is actually Mary Loomis, which is actually Lila Loomis and Sam Loomis's daughter.
Yes. And Mary Samuels is
Um,
the name Janet Leigh checked in at the motel,
oh,
which is
I
really
didn't
cool.
twig that. Ah,
Yes.
no, I did
Yes.
not twig that.
It's
Um,
yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So that's I mean, this is Twisterama, isn't it? I mean, they
it really is.
two things they had to do, I'm guessing, is one, they had to make a concession to the changing marketplace. So this has got very 80s slasher movie murders, including
Yeah,
the two people shagging in the basement of or it's
that's it.
it's in the
Yeah,
house. And it has to somehow one up the twist from the original. So, the cat's out of the bag. Although I think it does a great job in the ultimate misdirection, which was, whereas the first one is all about tricking everyone to think that Mother is the killer, this one spends the whole film tricking us that Norman, as much as we root for him, isn't reformed, is killing again, has
yeah.
gone mad again, he's under Mother's control again. When
That's the thing.
And the irony, of course, is that he's fallen victim, really, to, I suppose, what's a hate campaign, really, conducted by Lila, who
Yeah.
who wants to drive him insane again, which is, of
hmm
course, what his own mother did.
But yeah, that's the thing. There's people getting killed, as you say. People, Toomey gets killed. The kids in the basement and stuff all get killed around the same kind of time where Norman is there. But it's not him that's doing it, and it's not Lila or Mary that's doing it. And you're wondering who the hell is killing these people, though. But because it keeps twisting around, you think it could be them, or it
Yeah,
could be Norman reverting back because they're pushing him, which is basically their trick. That's what they want him to do, don't they? They want him to go nuts again, basically.
yeah,
They don't actually want anyone dead, but yeah, these people are turning up dead. And then it all goes a little bit crazy because he then starts getting phone calls from Mother.
yeah.
And Mary's like answering him back. She stood in front of him dressed as Mother, shouting at him that that's not Mother on the
Oh,
phone. And
yeah.
then he starts spinning off a story, but it's my real mother. So then there's this other little twist of the fact that maybe the first Mrs. Bates wasn't his mother. In this story, they're trying to say that there is another mother that gave him up to Norman. And you're like, what? That's just
Yeah.
crazy.
I do like that sequence that you mentioned, though. I think that's genuinely quite disturbing, where Meg Tilly, what's Meg Tilly called again? Mary.
Mary.
Mary is on the phone downstairs, and
Yeah.
Norman catches her in the act, and he's either pretending that he's deluded and he's gone mad again, or he's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, you're not sure
And there's a
because he's
horrible
got a kind
moment
of
where,
weirdness about him.
yeah, and there's an awful moment where Mary's genuinely scared, and of course Mary is a big part of this whole plot. So we're no longer very sympathetic to what was a really likable character at the start. And so there's that horrible moment where she's genuinely freaked out because the plot's really backfired.
Yeah.
And now we're not unsettled because we don't know. He could well be mad and he could well be about to kill her. So that's really well done. I think. Yes, it does go mad. It does go bonkers at the end. But it does always make me smile. I think the very last twist, like the punchline, which is such a cheat. But they had a lot to live up to, so I kind of forgive it. But the very end of it feels kind of like a real Hitchcock sequence, like this sweet old lady. The real killer turns out to be this sweet little old lady called Miss Spores.
Called Miss Spool, yeah, who then comes, she's convinced that Norman's her son, and she comes around to tell him. And yeah, after all the killing that's happened, you think, no more's going to happen. And then Norman, from out of nowhere, bless him, smacks her over the head with a shovel. It's the only kill he does throughout the whole movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's to kill an old woman so she can take the place of mother.
Yeah.
And it's so well played, that last sequence. I mean, it does have a massive "oh really" factor, which is okay, I suppose, because it of course asks you to believe that this little old lady killed someone like Mr. Toomey.
Yeah.
And obviously in those early scenes, I mean, Hitchcock cheated a lot. He cheats a lot in terms of, in lots of films where, hang on a minute, that can't be the killer because he was 2 feet taller in the earlier scenes when it was a shadow. But clearly it does it with Mrs. Spall in those early scenes. But if you buy into it, it's really fun.
Yeah, it's basically like the whole Friday the 13th original. Isn't it? With how can a small lady like that, Mrs. Voorhees, going around killing all them kids?
Even more so because she's been pinning them to doors, she's been lifting them up in the trees. A lot of upper body strength, that woman. Yeah, I think that's a mad twist. So yeah, I do like Psycho 2 a lot. I mean, it does have one bit which always quite shocks me, which is the killing of Lila with the knife through her mouth. That's pretty shocking.
Oh yeah, yes, I'd forgotten about that. And it does have a couple, going back to like Hitchcock type stuff. I just noticed one of my notes I've written down here was like when Mary first comes to stay at Norman at the house, she's sitting back and she's reading In the Belly of the Beast with the chair propped up against the door. I quite like that little touch as well. I thought that was quite clever.
That's cool, isn't it? Yeah, and there is the whole anticipation that it plays around with the fact that we're expecting almost another shower scene, but we don't get it really, not the kind we thought. And we expect Norman's going to have to be going mental, but he doesn't really. He's actually really fine, and almost everybody else in the film seems to be against him, except maybe the doctor, who's...
No, he's definitely on his side, isn't he? But yeah, unfortunately, yeah. And Mary kind of comes around to him as well, though, doesn't she? She suddenly realises that he's not a monster that Lila has made him out to be.
Yeah, Mary is as manipulated by her mum, I guess, as Norman was, not almost to the same extreme, I suppose, if it had gone on much longer. But yeah, so she's a victim of a quite understandably grief-stricken, embittered older woman. Yeah, it's really well played. I mean, Meg Tilly's an actress I always thought was really underrated. It's great that they got Vera Miles back after all that time. And yeah, I think it's overall. I think it is. I mean, especially when you consider what came later. Psycho 2 is a really strong sequel. It does have a lot of suspense. I think it's probably the most suspenseful of the sequels. In fact, it is the most suspenseful in terms of trying to recreate that tension. Yeah, well, so Psycho 2 is a big hit after all those years. Who'd have thought it? And I think there's a lot of toing and froing in between, but eventually Psycho 3 comes out in 1986, directed by Anthony Perkins. As far as I can understand it, he was pushing to... I think there was some kind of thing where he's saying, I'll come back if I can direct it, kind of deal. And certainly Mick Garris talks about Perkins wanting to direct Psycho 4 as well, which he wasn't allowed to.
No, I wonder how that would have turned out if he had. Hopefully a lot different.
Yeah, I think so too. Based on the evidence of Psycho 3, I think Psycho 3 didn't do very well. It had, unlike Psycho 2, which was really well reviewed, Psycho 3 was kind of panned and it didn't do very well commercially.
That's a shame. That's my preferred one out of the sequels. Psycho 2 was really good, but in my order of rundown, it would definitely go Psycho, then Psycho 3, Psycho 2, Psycho 4.
That is great, because I always thought Psycho 3 was the red-headed stepchild. I always thought it was really underrated. And in fact, you can usually find more positive reviews for Psycho 4 than you can for Psycho 3.
Oh my God, let's not go into that.
Yep. So Psycho 3, yeah, I'm really pleased you said that, actually, because I've always really liked it, and I've watched it a bunch. Psycho 3 is actually a really clever script, I think. It's by Charles Edward Pogue, who wrote the Fly remake the same year, so he had a kind of a impressive year from my point of view. And the cool thing about Psycho 3 is that it's like, oh, let's abandon all of this. You know, we're not a whodunit anymore. So we've been there, we've done that. So you know, it's back to business. You know, Norman is the one doing the killing in Psycho 3. So there's no mystery to solve. It does try to kind of follow through on the Miss Spool thing, although I'm not overly fussed about the Miss Spool plotline at that stage. So I'm kind of wanting to see more of Norman as this slightly older piano playing loner, always haunted by the past stuff. And what I really like about, Psycho 3 begins with a great homage to Vertigo, which is involving the suicidal nun played by Diana Scarwood, who's a really good actress. And I think the awkward relationship that she builds with Norman in this film, she runs away and she ends up at the Bates Motel like so many others, is really well done. He saves her effectively. He kind of, about as slickly as Norman can do, he wines and dines her, you know.
Yeah. Crackers and peanut butter or something. Oh no, that's him with the birds, isn't he?
That's right.
It shows him sitting there just casually poisoning birds and then stuffing them, eating his little crackers and peanut butter and stuff. But yeah, that sequence I thought that was really clever. How he because he sees her, he thinks, her initials are MC. She does look very similar to Marion. He gets freaked out when he sees her, doesn't he? And then she turns up at the motel, and that whole sequence where he's basically just going to go do the same thing as he did in Psycho. She goes to take a shower. He's watching through the peephole as White dresses up in his thing, ready to go, and then opens the curtain, and she's lying in the bath with her wrist slit. I thought that was great. And, she looks up at him and she thinks he's like the Virgin Mary holding a silver cross. I thought that was excellent.
A great, almost great dark joke, isn't it, in the Hitchcock tradition? Yeah, that's superb. Her saviour is this guy that, as you said, was coming to kill her.
That she is none the wiser on that. And he that snaps him out of it, and he saves her and takes her to hospital.
And it's and this strange tender relationship does build between them. I mean, there's a great, again, real dark irony in the fact that she's tragically killed by accident later on.
Oh God, yeah.
Literally on Cupid's arrow.
It's real sad.
There's a real tenderness in their scenes. They're really well done, and you don't often, horror or any genre, you don't see that many love stories about mature people in this case.
No, definitely not. Even those scenes though, like when they're like on the bed just cuddling and stuff, you're still just like, it's still a little bit awkward, but it's also really sweet.
Very awkward. Yeah, absolutely, and that shines through. Even though there's no questions, he's back to his old self again. You really root for him, and especially her as well. And I think that shower scene kind of riff is one of the many clever things that Anthony Perkins as a director does with this. There's a clever kind of callbacks. Unlike a movie that we may mention in a minute, but the callbacks to the original are really thoughtful, and they actually add something to the movie, like the bit in the car where Norman's trapped inside the submerging car as it goes into the swamp with one of his victims. The scene transitions, the dialogue is very clever, and it's very much in the spirit of the original without just being a carbon copy of it shoehorned in.
And explaining everything word for word. Making things up as it goes along to fit in with how it's going. It definitely throws back to the original. But yeah, we can't forget about Duke either. It's kind of half the reason why it's one of my favourites.
Yeah, tell me more. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Very, very, very lovely young Jeff Fahey. Is it Fahey? Is that how you pronounce?
Fahey,
Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah.
Fahey. Yeah, whatever. He's lovely.
And not blessed with many clothes at one point.
I mean, he's an absolute knob. He's a horrible, horrible character, and he tries to blackmail Norman, so we shouldn't really like him. But he is, very lovely in his shirtless stages with his guitar.
Yeah, it's great to see him.
Just his eyes, just those eyes, and his hair, just lovely.
Yeah, Jeff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always like Jeff Fair. He's great in this, and I suppose it's one of his early roles. He's been busy through the years, and
I loved him in Lost. He was fantastic.
I never watched Lost, so I don't know about that.
Oh my God, we're going to have to mention this in the TV episodes. No, he was fabulous in Lost. He was really good, and he's aged well. I'm pretty sure that was one of the main things that I'd seen him in was
Sure.
Lost, and I was kind of like, oh, hello, and then you see him much younger, and you're like, even more hello.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's got a bunch of great characters, I think, and even quite like a couple of the victims. There's the girl that gets lashed on the toilet, who's quite funny, who is played by
Yeah.
the future director Cache Rubin, who went on to do things like Strip to Kill and Poison Ivy later on.
Oh, cool.
So it's got a really interesting. It's off the wall. I think it's kind of wacky in ways that Psycho 2 wasn't. Psycho 2's a bit more well
Yeah.
behaved. Like this has got
Yeah.
the really weird
And
random
there's
stuff.
less
Like
to follow.
yeah, there's less to follow, so it's not plotty because there's
Mm.
not really a mystery to solve. The only kind of good amount of suspense comes from not knowing really where it's going to go with Maureen and everything else. But it's got this kind of, it's shot through with this kind of surreal sense of humor, like the Looney Tunes on TV, while
Yeah.
Norman mistakes Woody Woodpecker's laugh on TV for his mother's usual
His
mocking
mother's.
as he
Yeah, and
beats
there's a lot
Duke's
going on
death.
at the motel, isn't there? Yeah, with
Yeah,
his guitar.
absolutely.
Yeah, the motel actually suddenly becomes full of revelers and people going to a
Okay.
football game or something. So you can actually see Norman's reaction to all the noise and stuff that's going on. You can tell he's upset by this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost become like Mr. Toomey's hotel again, hasn't it? It's gone to seed, which works really well with his character. Yeah, I think it's really fun. There's not really anything negative I can think about. I think it's got a lot of good suspense, a lot of black comedy, more so than the second, probably about the same as the original. I like the stuff where he stashed the corpse in the ice box and
Oh
it
yeah, and
nearly
the
gets
cop
unravelled.
picks up the ice.
Yeah,
Yeah, picks up the ice and sticks it in his mouth, and you're like, he's not
yeah,
even looking.
that's great. And you again, like a tradition from the original, you root for him when he's trying to get the body out and he catches the arm, and I think he has to break the arm to actually get the corpse out,
Yes,
which is
yeah,
so Hitchcock. There's a great scene in Frenzy
yeah,
where the killer realizes his victim grabbed his tie pin when he was throttling her, and he has to basically climb into the back of this. I think it's a potato truck, and the girl's in a bag of potatoes or something, and he has to literally prise his tie pin
kill
out
it
of her
back.
dead hand. So that's pretty much a similar thing to what happened in Psycho 3, which is cool, which really works.
There was a couple of things that were a little bit dodgy in Psycho 3, though. I know it was really sad with Maureen getting pushed down the stairs or falling down the stairs. Does he push her or does she fall?
She
Either
falls,
way,
doesn't she? 'Cause yeah,
it's definitely not as good as the original one with Abigail going down the stairs. It looks like way too speeded up.
sure, yeah,
I think
not quite right.
continuity wise, and there was another thing that I noticed when you're going back to the bit where the car goes in the swamp, it pulls back to a shot as the car's going in the swamp. Bearing in mind there's supposed to be one person driving, a dead person in the boot, and someone attacking the person driving. It pulls back to the car going in the swamp, and there is no one in the car.
Stretch. Yeah,
I was like, oh, they could have at least put a mannequin in there or something, because it's really obvious. I don't normally notice stuff like that. It's normally stuff you read in the comments
yeah.
where you're like, oh, picky person finding all these things, but that's something that I really noticed
It
and was
does
like,
take you away.
oh,
Yeah, I know
oh
what you mean.
dear.
Did anyone spot this before they released it? Yeah, that is interesting. I think, yeah. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's just generally a
No,
lot of fun, isn't it? And
it is a lot of fun. Yeah,
and
still
to
my
me,
second favourite Psycho movie.
and I get that, and it also has like the actual sign off is wonderful. It's easily the best ending of the four. I mean, apart from the original, sorry, the best ending of the sequels. Which is
Oh yeah,
a final shot, which is probably the match for the original. I mean, it's a direct lift from the original, but with an extension, really, isn't it? Because
it's a bit creepy. Yeah,
he's fine. He's been taken off again. They've twigged. Cat's out of the bag. As I said, there's no mystery. So he's carried away back to the asylum, and he's got Mother's arm under his handcuffs, and he looks up to the camera in a very similar fashion to the 1960 film, and grins, and half the screen goes black, so it casts a shadow over his his smiley face, his slightly disturbed smiling face, and that's such a great final shot. And
It
I
is.
always thought that should have been. I mean, it's such a perfect callback to the original that should have been the end of the series. I mean, it's
Yeah, it is a perfect
that's
end.
the sign off, isn't it?
It's
Really?
come, it's come full circle. Yep, he's been shipped off again.
Yeah,
There's no hope type thing. But
yeah,
then they go and make Psycho 4.
yeah. So indeed. So yeah, even though it would have been a perfect ending, complete with the leading man directing himself in what hopefully would have been the
Hmm.
last one with Psycho 3. What a kind of nice symmetry that is. Psycho 4: The Beginning, which itself, even the title is like Friday the 13th: A New Beginning. Could they not come up with something different? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, Psycho 4: The Beginning came out in 1990. This is one of Anthony Perkins' last film. In fact, I don't know if it's true, but I read somewhere during this week that he got his HIV diagnosis during the making of this film. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but it does make sense with the timeline because I believe he died in 92. So Psycho 4: The Beginning, directed by Mick Garris, has the great coup, really, of screenwriter Joseph Stefano, who did write a few things in the interim between this and the original Psycho, coming back. Robert Bloch wrote a couple of Psycho sequel books, which were totally different to any of the sequel films. And in fact, Norman dies in quite early on in his Psycho 2. And there was a Bates Motel TV movie that tried to use the Bates Motel in a kind of horror anthology thing, focusing more on the guests at the Bates Motel. Now it's been taken over by someone that Norman befriended in the asylum. But Psycho 4 does, as it says, goes back to the beginning. Norman Bates is talking to a radio talk show, and the subject is matricide. And Norman Bates is on parole, isn't he, in this one?
Yeah. Hmm.
And he's married a psychologist who he met in the institution, who obviously isn't overly concerned about the impact of keeping a secret like having his baby might have on his sanity.
Mm.
And it's his birthday, so he's waiting for his wife to come home with her surprise. And one of the nice touches of Psycho 4 script is that he calls himself Ed on the phone to the radio host played by CCH Pounder, which is a direct reference to Ed Gein. And a big part of the film, a big part of the structure, Norman Bates, as played by Anthony Perkins, isn't really in it much. He's a bit like Freddy in the Freddy's Nightmare TV series. He's almost there as the host to pop up at the start and occasionally in the
Yeah.
middle, and then at the end.
Narrator.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
it's not really Anthony Perkins' film, sadly, because so much of it is about how he became the man he became. So we get the flashbacks of young Norman at various stages of his descent into mother-driven insanity. The script is full of quotes from the original, literally full of quotes from the original.
Mm.
The quotes from the original: mother, blood, not inordinately, a boy's best friend, mother hasn't been herself today, are endless. I mean, it's a kind of quote-orama, just in case
Yeah.
we forgot that this is by the writer of the original.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is good things about this, but take me through, Sarah. I mean, what would you say are the good points of Psycho 4?
I would say exactly what you just said there. You've pointed out the good things about it. It's nice to see that Norman has come out again and that he's married, and you kind of think, oh, okay, that's kind of normal. But for me, that's kind of where it ends with the good points. I suppose you get to understand a little bit how his mother treated him, but we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? And we were just saying how miscast mother is. I think that's what ruined it for me.
Yeah,
All the time you're led to believe that she's this very Christian, prudish, straight-laced. I mean, they all even mentioned that in the film. Norman was explaining something about his mother to the lady on the radio show, saying that, he basically did call her a prude, didn't she? Or his dad had called her a prude.
yeah.
Then when you actually get to meet her, she's this kind of curvy, buxom, flirtatious person that just doesn't seem anything like you've ever imagined mother to be. She's a lot younger than I thought she was as well.
Yeah, it
It was
doesn't
just
make a
the
lot of sense.
picture that I'd kind of no, it's just the picture I'd made up in my mind. Um, I think Henry Thomas does do quite a good job as young Norman, doesn't he? He's got the kind of nervousness down to a T. It's just a shame that they don't really look like each other.
Yeah, I think he does a really good job, actually. Yeah, um, absolutely. Yeah, I suppose physically it's a bit tricky, but I think he does the mannerisms really well. And the stuff where it's just him is probably the best stuff. Maybe with the first girl that he sneaks up to the house, the awkwardness of
Mm-hmm.
that is really well played. And she's the girl, the very first girl to get murdered is quite cleverly, I think, acted as almost
Yeah,
a caricature of what mother would see as every young woman, you know, because she's
yeah.
she's desperate for some sex, and you know it's quite cleverly done that. Um, there's some nice, yeah, there is some decent stuff. I mean, I quite liked um, the little detail, like Norman saying how he couldn't make her voice as sweet as hers, which maybe
Yeah,
fits with the casting, the miscasting, as you quite rightly say, because of course we only know Mother as this caricature of a crotchety old lady, complete with that voice, uh,
yeah.
and then he saw her as this sweet woman. I mean, maybe as it's Norman's tale, maybe he has in his mind cast his mother as this woman, as played by Olivia Hussey, who is very different to what we saw, and maybe she really was far from that, you know, like you said, buxom brunette, kind of young-looking mother. Maybe that's some vision that he has of her, but it doesn't work. I think Olivia Hussey is genuinely quite flat and just
Mm-hmm.
not very interesting. I mean, it's maybe the most thankless role in horror history because she has to play someone that we've imagined for about 30 years. How do you cast
Yeah.
it? um,
How do you play that? Not the way she did, unfortunately.
yeah, I mean, if it helps, I mean, she did Two for Two in 1990 because she's also dreadful in It as Beverly. You know,
Oh
she's
yeah.
also miscast in that as well, which again is a bit
Mm.
unfortunate for her. But yeah, I mean, I
The
think we
whole movie
suggested it.
is very strung out, isn't it? It takes a long time for
Yeah,
anything to happen. I mean, the whole bit when you get a bit excited because he's getting to the point where he's telling the radio presenter, you're getting to the point that, oh my God, we're going to find out, exactly how he killed her, and you're going to see that bit and stuff. And that whole bit I feel like it took like about 3/4 of an hour
yeah,
for them to actually die, and they're rolling around on the floor, and then you think they're dead, and then all of a sudden, oh, he's appeared at the top of the stairs, and then oh no, he's dead again, and then oh, he appears, he's managed to crawl all the way from the stairs down to the basement to attack him again, but no, he's dead again. That was pretty bad.
yeah. It goes through the paces and it goes through the swamp thing again. Not actually Swamp Thing. That's a different story. But the thing in the swamp, who isn't
Yeah.
Swamp. Although if Swamp Thing had turned up, that might have been a bit better. Um,
Yeah, might have like made it a little bit more interesting.
but yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose the two things about this is one, it proves that sometimes it's best to leave out what you'd always been left to your imagination. You know, we gain nothing by seeing this stuff. We didn't need to see a scene of Norman getting an erection, you know, as he's tumbling about with his mum. We didn't need to see that. We could have
Mm,
maybe guessed that might have
no.
happened if we'd have thought about it. But and so much of it is just basically it's 90 minutes of playing psycho bingo. So you know we're there with our cards. And, oh, trusty umbrella. Yep, take
Got that one. Yep.
candy corn munching. Yep,
Snap.
a driving scene that's a bit like Janet Leigh driving but isn't. Yep, tick.
Mm-hmm,
um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and it's just such a sad waste of Anthony Perkins, who did get some really cool roles in the 80s that weren't Norman Bates, and did replay Norman Bates very well as middle-aged Norman in the
Mm.
two films before it. But here doesn't have much to do. It's
He's
got
a
a
bit
particular,
out of character in this as well, isn't he?
yeah, it's a bit
He
off.
gets quite angry. Yeah, he's a bit off, and he gets quite angry. I suppose the end reveal, when he says that his wife's pregnant and stuff, that was a little bit of a shock horror for me. I was like, oh no way. This might get a little bit more interesting. because he's basically saying to the radio presenter that he's going to kill again, and he basically tells her that he wants to kill his wife because she's pregnant, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And he takes her back to the house, and then he goes to do it, but he can't. And there's just that bit where he has the knife in his hand, and then he puts his hand over his eyes because he doesn't want to see himself kill her, and she just runs. It's just like, well, that was easy.
So that's all
obviously,
right,
you know, yeah.
There's so much.
I just
that's
can't. I want to kill you, but I can't look at you. So he puts his hand over his eyes. So the victim's obviously like, right, I'm out of here. Then I'm not going to hang around and wait for you to stab me. And he just seems a little bit over dramatic at times as well. You know, the bit when he's in the burning house and he's kind of waving his arms around. I'm like, I'm not sure about that. Just
Absolutely.
seems a little bit not quite as Norman as he was in the first three.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the nothing about the relationship he has with his wife makes sense or is convincing. It that's a misjudgment. The thing with the baby seems to me a bit of a soap opera stretch, and it's just and everything about it feels. I mean, it was made. I think it was made for cable TV. It's a TV movie that they clearly shot on the Universal Bates Motel mock-up at Florida, and it does end like a TV movie, with a neat fire that ties everything up. The Bates house is on fire, and he's won the battle against his murderous other self, and it looks like everything's going to be okay.
Then they do the thing with the chair in the basement.
Oh, and the babies cry at the very end, isn't it, as well?
Oh yeah, creepy. The only creepy thing about it. That's definitely not a good one. Not for me.
Absolutely, and I mean, unfortunately, he wasn't around for much longer, but it was definitely one too far, and there was no way back from that, really. Once you've done Psycho 3 should have been the end, but once you've done the beginning, unfortunately, it started a trend of other films sequels later on, where suddenly it was important to know that Leatherface was bullied as a child, or Michael Myers had an awful stepdad. Because we really need to see that.
We really need to know.
Some backstory about those mutants from Wrong Turn 6, I think, is really important. Psycho 4 doesn't really exist. We've cast it out of movie history, unless of course you like it. And the 1998 remake even, is a really good one if you're wanting to see muscular 10-foot tall Vince Vaughn playing Norman Bates having a massive wank as he watches someone really badly playing Janet Leigh. And Julianne Moore, to bring it up to date to the 90s, says things like, "I'll get my Walkman," as the as the remake's version of Lila. And I think they increased the amount of the money, so they've really
okay. It's $100,000.
Total toilet.
I think I still, on a very slow movie day, we will watch it.
Yeah, I agree, because
just for the morbid fascination of it.
I saw it in the cinema, actually.
Oh my God, you paid money to go and see it?
Yeah, it was just fascinating. I went to see it with my friend who was a massive Psycho fan. We were both so much a fan of Psycho that we had to see the remake because it was, and it felt quite rightly, actually, and it still is. It felt like something that had to be seen.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, you can't deny its existence because it exists. You can choose to ignore it, and the original's not going away. But it felt a must-see, and we watched it almost hypnotized by how god-awful it is. But the fact that we watched it, is something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the Psycho franchise, and 3 out of 4 ain't bad, really.
No, absolutely.
So what we're going to do now is just a little feature for Halloween before we head off into the night, is just to, as promised actually, count down, not in any order because that would be mental and impossible, but we're going to give each other a little chewing over of our 10, at the moment, scariest moments in movies. And we want you to do the same. So if you're listening to this and you hear our chosen 10, which of course could change if you asked us again next week or even in half an hour, what we're asking you to do as well as listeners is email in your own. We'd like to know. It's entirely subjective. We're not going to laugh at them. if you think the scariest thing in movie history is something from Return to Oz, you'd probably be right, because it is really disturbing. But do email your own favourite moments from scary movies, or even if there's a terrifying moment from a non-horror movie that you think trumps any of the horror ones that we're going to be mentioning. The email address to send this to is horrorscreams.org@gmail.com with the subject podcast in the subject line. And we'll read out some of your suggestions next time. But let's go through our own. We've chosen 10, which itself was a bit of a task. So we'll alternate and see what we came up with. And just again, we tried to put these in an order, but ended up getting slightly savage about it. So we've just kind of put them in any old order as 10 moments from movies that stand out as maybe the scariest from our own point of view. So Sarah, do you want to give us your first one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like you said, Stephen, it could be anything that scared anyone, because, you know, it's all subjective, isn't it? Everyone's scared of something and it's all different for everyone else. When I was a kid, I was absolutely scared of everything. You know, most movies scared me. So it was actually quite hard, you know, thinking back to my childhood, what movie scared me the most. Basically anything would. If there was something slightly scary in it, I would run out the room and leave. I don't quite know how I ended up being such a big horror fan or zombie movie fan, because I was just so petrified of most things. So yeah, a lot of these films that I'm now about to mention in my kind of top 10 are ones that I never really made it straight through watching the first time, because it was just so scary. My first one that I'm going to mention is one that we did mention in the episode of the Spookies and the 1986 movie rundown, and it's The Fly. His transformations, and when he spits up acid and dissolves that guy's hand. Yeah, that absolutely scared the bejesus out of me when I was younger.
Yep, I get that. That makes a lot of sense. Those movies, there's lots of different kinds of being freaked out and scared, isn't there? And that's, I suppose, Cronenberg's thing of how disgusting the body is, the human body. Fragile.
I found it absolutely fascinating, but at the same time, I was like really freaked out by it. How about
Such
you?
a great film. Yeah, again, in random order. So there are 3 versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers that I absolutely love. There's one with Nicole Kidman, that's terrible. The previous comments about Psycho 98. But there's 3 from before that. And as much as I like the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and as much as I love the 1978 Donald Sutherland one, which could have made this 10 list, there's one sequence in the 1993 one, which is the one set on the military base, that I think is terrifying and gives me the willies if I just watch the clip on YouTube, which is basically Meg Tilly, who, strange crossover with Psycho 2, she's literally the woman that replaced the mother of the heroine. So in other words, she's a stepmother who happens to be the one, quite cleverly in the story's terms, who is taken over quite early on by the aliens. And she gets a speech where they finally realise why she's been acting so strange, which is brilliantly done. And Meg Tilly's so chilling in it, where she basically asks, where are you going to run? Where are you going to hide? There's nowhere like you, nowhere, because there's no one like you left. And the way she delivers it was just very slow and very deliberate and very detached. There's no one like you left. And they flee the house and she lets out the hideous alien shriek that is carried over from the 70s one. But that speech where she confirms that, you know, this isn't happening just here, it's happening everywhere. So there's nowhere to run. And
it's just bleak and grim and depressing. And
and the film,
I can see that.
Confirms that later on. But it's that middle point sequence which is brilliantly done. So that, I think, is the scariest out of all of those great films based on Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And yeah, that's top of the tree.
Oh, creepy. Okay, my next one is another 1986 movie, and it's Aliens.
Oh, yeah, nice.
I can't pinpoint a definite one. Basically, all of the deaths freaked me out, because quite a lot of them were pretty shocking. Even the ones even Bishop, I think I was actually quite distraught with, like, Bishop's demise and stuff. But obviously that movie, I'd not seen Alien, so that was my first experience of seeing the facehuggers, the eggs, the chest bursters, and the xenomorphs all in one, and I was just like, holy crap, this is really scary. Yeah.
Aliens is great, isn't it? Aliens is a great ride.
I love it now, but I couldn't. Yeah, it took me a long time to make it through the whole movie.
I get that. Yeah, and I think sometimes depending on when you watch these things, like for me, if one of the main characters was a child about my same age, that would change the outlook as well, which I think is why, although I'm not now, but I used to be quite frightened by Halloween 4 because it's got young Jamie as the target. And when you're about the same age, you think, oh God, he's actually going to kill her. That's a whole different level of disturbing. So that's really cool. Aliens is great. My next one is The Descent, which was a great experience in the cinema. And I think will probably never be the same. I think I have watched it on DVD, but I don't think you could recreate that in a proper situation where, it's very dark and there's no distractions. There's lots of great scares in The Descent, and I think it does have one of my all-time favourite jump scares. I guess it's a jump scare, which is where you see the crawler in the viewfinder. They're called crawlers, the monsters, I think. Yeah, crawlers.
Yeah.
You see the crawler or a crawler in the viewfinder of a camera. Which is a great reveal. I've not seen it for a while. I think it might be the first proper reveal of what they look like. And the position at the film it's in, the setting, which is horribly claustrophobic and nightmarish. The monsters are great.
Yeah.
Love The Descent.
Oh, that is a good one. Yeah, great. that is creepy.
Absolutely.
Ooh. Okay, my next one is Predator from 1987.
Hey, Predator's great.
just the bit when you see one of the guys like up in the tree, completely skinned.
Oh, yeah, that's horrifying.
Yeah, it's like right at the beginning. I think I kind of warmed up to the rest of it after I'd seen that bit, but that first bit, the skin dude, yeah, that was pretty scary for me.
Yeah, I love Predator. I've seen it relatively recently, and it really holds up, and it's still gory, and it still moves really well.
Yeah, I'm a fan of all of them. Did you like the new one?
I loved the new one. I thought it was great fun. Yeah, it was hilarious and it was gory. It was terrific. I think that's my favourite sequel of the Predator films.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good one.
So much fun. My next one is a movie that's also been remade. Oh, God. Which is The Fog, the John Carpenter Fog.
Oh, yes.
Now, owing to things, what will be happening down the line soonish. We might be talking about this in more depth soon, but the fog scare for me, maybe again it's a childhood thing. I watched it when I was really young, but the great, horrifying, terrifying bit where the little kid's called Andy and he's with his babysitter, Mrs. Kobritz, I think her name is, because you remember these things when you're scared by them. And she does the foolish thing of going to the door when they're knocking at the door with their hooks, and you see, and she's so lovely. What makes it much more scary is she's like a Nan character, with all, she reminded me of my Nan, and she is the archetypal Nan. Nan, don't go to the door, Andy's saying that kind of stuff. Nah, you'll be crazy, you're going to get killed. And she does, and she gets killed, and it's the most shocking death, even though it's just in the fog, obviously, because it's the fog. But that whole build-up and that whole scare of where you think, oh, fuck, if they're killing off the Nans.
what else are they capable of? Yeah, exactly.
And the fact, I think, generally, the fact that he was a monster or he was a threat that could get under doors, that was the other thing, the fog's, it's under the door.
Yeah, it's everywhere, yeah.
Literally batten down the hatches. John Carpenter's The Fog, really fun, scary film, and that one sequence is, high up in my list.
Nice. My next one is The Exorcist. They're very predictable, mine, as you see. Not necessarily narrowing down any one point, just most of what Reagan says and does once she's possessed. The first time watching that, I don't know if I was necessarily scared, but I was just shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole thing is really unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it still is. I don't think it's
right through to the end.
Power. And it's very, very downbeat. It's very convincing as well. I think it's dealing with some stuff that could just be unintentionally silly or funny even. But to me, the whole thing, brilliant choice, man. I think that's aged as well as Psycho. I love the Exorcist. My next one is American Werewolf in London.
Ooh.
Which is often, I think, mistaken as a horror comedy, because and I think John Landis says this as well, but I never saw it as a horror comedy. I think it's a genuinely frightening and ultimately at the end actually really tragic horror film that just happens to be really funny at times.
Yeah, but you don't get the humour to start off with, or I didn't. I was going to say, sorry, that's appeared on my list as well. I'm just waiting to see which bit.
Well, it's probably predictable, but it's the entire sequence on the moors,
Oh,
where
okay.
they've been to the slaughtered lamb, they've had the
Yep.
"don't go there, stick to the roads" lad,
Yep.
um, and that whole sequence in the pub is uncomfortably funny because you recognise. I mean, it's basically a Norfolk pub right there,
Yeah.
including the
Yeah.
dart
Yeah.
player that stops when someone walks in. But what happens next is genuinely frightening. I mean, normally a werewolf film wouldn't make it into my list, but this is mostly an unseen werewolf, and we all know what it's like to walk in that scary bit of town or the woods or whatever.
You
And the
get that
way
same
it's done is
feeling you
brilliant.
did when you watched it.
Yeah, and that still holds up. I mean, that
Yeah.
whole sequence brilliantly done. A really terrifying bit.
Yep. I had that on my list, and I found the transformation bit really
Ah,
terrifyingly scary as well. Just that you kind of just went through it with him, or I did the first
sure,
time round. The
it's
pain of it
painful.
all, and I was freaked out when Jack came back, when he visited him in the hospital.
Yes,
But
that's
then
quite.
after that, I kind of warmed to it, and as he got more and more like rotted and stuff, I kind of got the humour of it.
And he's cracking jokes, and he's a
Yeah,
walking meatloaf, is what
yeah.
we call it. Yeah, yeah, I love it's one of the great horror films. I
I think
think probably top 10 horror films of all time for me. Um,
yeah, and I think a lot of people, saw it when they were quite young, and always will remember that as having a particularly scary moment in their forum.
oh, just terrific. Yeah, love that.
Okay,
Absolutely. What was next?
my next one is Dawn of the Dead,
Ah,
1978.
The One of the Dead.
One of the first zombie movies that I really paid attention to, and just basically the beginning bit of it before they even move to the mall when they're soldiers and they're trying to clear that flat or the apartment building, and you have a black guy who's already turned, and his wife is trying to comfort him and trying to get him back, and he literally just munches a massive chunk out of her neck. I was like, whoa, that did freak me out to start off with. And then they then go down to the basement and try and clear all the zombies. I'm like, oh my god, is it just going to be like this?
Mm. That's such a jolting sequence, isn't it? Because it's so
Mm,
different as well. If you come off the back of Night of the Living Dead, it's so different in kind of
yeah.
pace and oh yeah, the cleansing of the ghetto. Yeah, that's really grim. Dawn of the Dead is awesome, and of course coming up in a very handsome release very soon.
Yes,
Ah,
so
yeah.
excited to get that. Counting down the days.
Not long to go. The next one on my list, I was going to put The Exorcist. I nearly put The Exorcist in, but then I figured the whole of The Exorcist is disturbing, so I didn't know what
Yeah,
individual sequence to put. So
there's no
just put,
particular bit.
it's not the whole thing. So I put The Exorcist 3 because Exorcist 3 has two of my favourite scares of all time in isolation. I like the film a lot, but these two moments, well, I'll pick just one of them because that'd be greedy. But there's two moments in the film which are really great scares, and I guess they're both sort of jump scares. But the one that I'll never forget is the one in the hospital corridor,
Hmm.
which goes on for a long time, and most of it is a single shot that holds for longer than you feel comfortable because you're thinking, well, nothing's happening here, and eventually. I mean, it misdirects you cleverly because there's a security guard in the scene for much of the sequence. So you think, well, nothing too bad's going to happen. He's right there, she's there, and there's chatter and there's a bit of distraction. And then the point at which you're looking stage right from stage left, or it may be the other way around. I could have it around the wrong way. Comes this thing with the pair of hideous shears that are used to kill,
Oh, yeah.
and it's set up so well. It's a jump scare that isn't done in the usual jump scare way, and
Mm.
you never even when I watch it again, I'm never quite sure when it's going to appear. So I'm like, oh god,
You're on
because it
edge before it
tricks
even
you.
happens.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
brilliant misdirection. That sequence. There's a bit later on with the possessed nurse on the ceiling that's really
Oh yeah.
disturbing, but
Hmm.
the old Big Shears McGraw in the hospital corridor,
Ah,
no
creepy,
blood,
creepy.
just
No,
creepy.
just creepy. Okay, my next one's slightly embarrassing. It's kind of getting a little bit more further in time, but my next one is Tremors from
Oh,
1990. It scared the absolute crap out of me when I first watched that. I think when 1990 came out, I must have been getting on for like, I don't know, 12 or 13. But the whole bit when the graboids first start coming out of the ground, I think they go for some horses and stuff. And I
Yes.
lived out in the country, and I had horses, and I had nothing but land around me. And I just remember so many times going out to my field going, something's going to come and grab me, and running across the field to the nearest bit of concrete I could find because of the graboids.
God. Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea, isn't it? To have something subterranean like that, which is, like you said, especially if you live around here.
Yeah. Living out in the country, they could come up and get you from anywhere. I still think about it occasionally.
That's cool. And on a similar level, like I used to be, I mean, it's rubbish because I've watched it again. It doesn't quite hold up, but I used to really like a film called Blood Beach, which is where um, it's revealed eventually as this ropey looking giant mollusk, I think, but not until the end. But people are being sucked into the sand on the
Yeah.
beach, and you realize it's this thing under there that's eating them, that's come from somewhere. And yeah, that always freaked me out when I was a certain age because I thought, oh, geez, because Jaws had scared me to get into the ocean, and the whole thing here was you can't get to the ocean because you've been eaten by a giant mollusk.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so it's again about feeling vulnerable in the places that are supposed to be happy
Yeah, that
and
you're supposed to feel
cheerful.
safe in, yeah.
My next one is maybe a bit under the radar, but it really spooks me still, and it's a film called Lake Mungo
Oh, okay.
from about a decade ago. It's Australian, and it's a kind of a fake mockumentary, a documentary
Hmm.
even, and that stuff done really well is usually the things that freak me out. And this is a really good ghost story in effect, told in a very modern way as like I said, a fake documentary format, and it has just such a disturbing image, and it actually spoils it to tell you what that is. But basically, it's a story of this girl that's tragically died. I think she's 16 or 17. She's disappeared, and they find her drowned. And you gradually realise through this very slow burn, creepy plot that she knew she was going to die before she did. So the final reveal of that involves an image on a phone, and
Mm.
and the way it's done, especially in such an underplayed film, is so frightening. It's so disturbing and actually so sad because you realise that she knew this was going to happen before it did. That film really haunts me. That's such a good film, but very quiet. So it creeps up on you, and then when that moment happens, which is the one big moment of like, you're left kind of totally bereft and realise you can't sleep for a while. So Lake Mungo, check it out if
Okay,
you dare.
if you dare. Okay, my next one is going back to werewolf movies. So I have two on my list. My next one is Dog Soldiers from 2002. Now, it's kind of a similar thing to the whole bit with American Werewolf in London. I wasn't actually scared by the werewolves. They kind of showed the werewolf so many times, you kind of got a little bit numb to it in Dog Soldiers, didn't you? But
Sure.
I'm trying to think. It's the bit at the beginning when they're in the woods and they can hear things snuffling around, and I think there's either a hole in the ground or something, and they're hunkered down, and all of a sudden it's either a dead cow or a dead deer or something gets thrown up and like splats on the ground in front of them. That really unnerved me. Before you'd even seen a single werewolf, or something like that did it for me for Dog Soldiers. It's a great film, even though it does overshow werewolves quite a lot.
Yeah.
I still really like it, but that bit is effectively probably the most scary bit for me.
Yeah, I really like Dog Soldiers as well, and I'm always a bit disappointed that there's not that many great werewolf films.
Mm.
Generally, actually, it seems like there's a few, isn't there? And that's one of them. And they don't always hold up as well as you think. But yeah, I get that. That's a cool film. My next one is actually one that was mentioned before, so just be brief with this one. But in the recently seen, the 1989 version of The Woman in Black has two
Oh yeah.
really terrifying moments, and I don't know which one is scarier, really. But there's a great kind of, again, I suppose it's a jump scare, but it's again done in a certain way. But it's a great moment where the woman in black is basically hovering over the hero in bed, and she appears with a horrible shriek, and she's right in his face, and it's not what you want to wake up to. It's absolutely terrifying. And also the ending of The Woman in Black is just the most grim and sour thing you've ever seen. And when I watched it again, I was like, oh no, this is really... I had to go and, have a damp copy of the Radio Times on my face or something and watch some cartoons.
Yeah.
But yeah, The Woman in Black 1989 style is really creepy, and it's got those two moments. It's a very quiet film again, like Lake Mungo, but those two moments are proper full on, like, ooh. I think is the word.
Definitely. Okay, I'm getting to the end of my list now. Another fairly recent one, and it's a remake. Dawn of the Dead 2004 by
I
Zack
like that.
Snyder. Loads of people love this movie. I love this movie. It's great, and it still creeps me out. Just the few bits. There's the bit when they're in the mall and they're running through the underground car park, and you can hear the zombies running, but you can't see them. It's just the blackness and stuff, very unnerving.
Nice.
There's also the bit with the zombie baby that freaked me out, and then the
Yes, that's
whole
terrific.
the whole sequence at the end, the bleak ending when they get on the boat. And have you ever watched it beyond the credits?
Yeah, because the zombies are on the island, right? Is that what happens?
Yeah, and you see them flashes of them on the boat, and the food's all full of maggots and stuff, and then they eventually get to the island and they're just greeted by another horde.
Yes, that's a
that
nice
that
thing.
was it for me. I was just like, that was brilliant, but it's also, the ending that nobody wants. That it, like you said, with the same thing with the invasion of the body snatchers, it's everywhere. You ain't getting away from it.
Oh, that's great. That's bold as well because it was a big movie, wasn't it? It was a big remake, and they could have gone happy
It's
clappy. And
great.
it's a really good. It's probably one of the best remakes. Yeah.
It
Um,
is, yeah.
nice. My next one is Session 9, which is, I think most of mine actually, a bit predictable, I suppose, but most of mine are sort of quiet horrors with a supernatural bent, which tends to be the stuff that spooks me. But Session
Hmm.
9 is such a creepy film. It's set in an abandoned asylum where a bunch of manly men have to go and work and sort out the asbestos and things like that. What men do, apparently. And
Hmm.
it's got a disturbing series of tapes. One of them is Session 9 from a psychiatrist that interviewed a person with multiple personalities. And there's a reveal in Session 9 where you realize this guy who's been falling apart during the movie has been terribly affected by the personality that is homicidal and is extremely evil. And you realize that what you thought had happened hasn't quite happened, and he's killed his wife and baby in the scenes in between what you're watching. And it's just horrifying. And the the finale is basically the voice of the Session 9 tape explaining about this personality called Simon, and you get to hear Simon speak for the first time properly. So he's been a presence throughout the film off camera, but at the very end, Simon speaks properly, and it's just such a chilling closing moment of this evil personality from this person who has many. Yeah, proper good psychological horror, and it's got David Caruso in it as well for any David Caruso fans,
Nice.
if they're out there. Yes, your next one, Sarah.
Oh, very good. Yeah, my final one is a very recent one, and it's an absolutely brilliant film, and it will always freak me out every time I watch it. It's Hereditary from 2018.
Oh, Hereditary.
Yeah, it's the little girl. She makes a clicking noise, and it kind of sticks with you throughout the film, doesn't it? You hear it in random places. Oh my God, that literally, like, I get goosebumps even just thinking about it. That really freaks me out. It's an absolutely
Hereditary,
brilliant
great.
film, though.
Yeah, that's extremely creepy, sustained, isn't it? And yeah,
Mm,
probably the most of the recent stuff. That's the creepiest. That's a brilliant piece of work.
definitely.
Yeah, that could have been on my list. I did think about Hereditary actually. The last two of mine are basically the Blair Witch Project. The last 5 minutes. I am a
Oh
huge
yes,
fan of the Blair Witch Project.
yes. That didn't make it into my top 10, but I've got it on my mentions. Both of them, the Blair Witch Project and the Blair Witch from 2016, both had really creepy moments, didn't they? Brilliant
Great.
films.
Oh, I really think so. I've always stood by Blair Witch Project as being one of the great horror films.
Yes.
Effectively one of the great ghost stories, if you choose to see it as that. And
Yeah.
there's many moments in it that I find really creepy, and some are very, very small. But the last 5 minutes in the house when they finally make it to the house,
Oh.
and
Yeah.
I've just forgotten his name. Not Josh, but the other guy, Mike. Mike is in the
Hmm.
corner facing the wall,
Yeah.
handprints on the wall. And you realise all the stuff that the locals were kind of talking about half jokingly early on is kind of coming true, how he made people face the wall, if you believe that part of the
Yeah.
story. And the camera falls down. It was early in the found footage thing, so the whole idea of the camera falling down and everybody being dead was quite new. So, yeah, seeing that in the cinema and then just watching it again and again, which I have done, it really
Yeah.
holds up. It's just so
It still
terrifying.
does. Yeah.
You
Yep.
still don't see anything except him facing the wall. You still don't
No,
really know. Is it just them going mental in the woods? Who knows? But it doesn't matter because, it's just
no.
scary
You,
that it could have been
yep.
us.
You're still absolutely shitting yourself.
And the final one, which was high on the list of shitting oneself, is Ghostwatch, which is perfect for this time of year because it's set on Halloween. If anyone doesn't know, especially people not from England, this was the BBC's 1992 fake documentary, essential fake live broadcast from a haunted house in England or in London, and it had real life personalities famous from chat shows and TV hosting things playing themselves, and it's a very clever mislead. And I watched it on my own at home when I was 14 and was really frightened more than ever before. And when I've rewatched it, it still really holds up. The ghost in it is called Pipes, and it's very disturbing. He's like a paedophile that was eaten by his own cats when he died at home. And this live broadcast has brought him back to life effectively through like a nationwide seance using the power of television. And it just has so many moments. I think the whole thing would make it belong in my top 10, but I suppose the bit where Sarah Green gets shoved in the what they call the glory hole, which is a dark room under the stairs.
Yes.
But the whole thing, I mean, there's a great sequence where you see it early in the film where it just looks like a normal shot of a girl's bedroom, and then people phoning into the fake show say that they've seen a shape on the curtains. And each time they re-show it in the film, you don't realise when you watch it the first time, but it's slightly shifted. So each time you watch it, the same shot, you start to see a figure at the curtains. But then you start to doubt yourself because other viewers in the fake show ring up and say they haven't seen anything. There's nothing at the curtains. So the movie cleverly, very subtly plays with your mind. And Ghostwatch probably would always lead the charge because nothing scared me as much as Ghostwatch back in 1992 when I was such a young lad.
Yay.
So that's it. I mean, we could pull out a whole bunch of choices. I think what we'll do, I mean, please send, as we said, email in your suggestions if you've listened to this and felt, you missed out, so and so. We deliberately have because we could only choose 10. But email in, as we said, to horrorscreams.org@gmail.com and pop the subject of podcast in the subject line in case you end up in a different part of Pete's inbox, the one reserved for comely young men, which, of course, is a whole different podcast. So next time, we're going to be talking about something very exciting, even more exciting than this, which is the films of John Carpenter. And we're going to be particularly focusing on The Thing as our retro rewind. And then we're going to be taking a trawl through his work, all the way back to Dark Star, through to things like The Ward and Masters of Horror. And that should be quite exciting, Sarah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely looking forward to it, especially The Thing. The Thing's a great thing to talk about.
And as it goes into winter,
Movie.
I think it's the
and
ultimate.
Darkness and freaky dog things, yes.
Isolation, lockdown. Yeah, it all makes sense. Infection. So The Thing is great. We're going to be joined by an old friend of the podcast, Matt Blissett, who will be here to join us in a threesome with John Carpenter, of course. Won't physically be here, but he'll be here in spirit, possibly touching us up slightly when we're not looking. And so really all we can say is have a fantastic Halloween. The next episode will be going live on November the 27th, and just in time for the build up to Christmas, which is in December this year. And take care of yourselves, and I think that's probably it, Sarah, wouldn't you say?
It certainly is. Yeah, have a great Halloween, everyone.
Yeah, enjoy it, and we'll be seeing you and hearing you next time. But in the meantime, enjoy, and thanks for listening, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.